Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I'm super excited to have you guys here because in this crash course we're going to learn all about GraphQL. We're going to learn what GraphQL is, how it is used, its benefits. We're going to learn how to build a GraphQL API, and we're going to learn about mutations and queries, of course, and we're going to get to all that in this crash course. So I'm super excited. Now I'm even more excited because this is going to be a snippet of a super long crash course that I made on Udemy for GraphQL. So if you really enjoy this and you want to up your GraphQL knowledge even more, please go ahead and check that out. So that's enough of the intro. Let's get right to it. In this section, what we're going to be doing is answering the question, what is GraphQL? And to do this, let's go through a relatively real-life scenario. So let's imagine that you are a car salesman and you have a bunch of cars in your lot and you want to sell them. And luckily somebody came, he looked at a car, liked the price and approached you, and then they were like, yes, I want to finance this car. Let's go through the process. And you're excited. Okay, this is awesome. But before I do that, I need to check two things. Company policy says that I can only sell you a car if you are a citizen of the country that you're living in. So let's say we're living in Canada. So you need to check the citizenship, and you also need to check their credit score, because if they have a poor credit score, you might not want to finance this car for them. So what do? Well, you go to your computer, and in your computer you have this database, and what you do is you search that person's name. So let's say that person's name is John Doe. So you go ahead and you search for it. And then you get a bunch of information about John Doe. So you have their gender, their birth date, their occupation, their spouse, their social security number. I don't know why that would be needed, but whatever, I put it in there. And then you can see here, we have their citizenship. Okay, citizens of Canada. We have their email, we have their phone, and we have their credit score, which is 800. So after a quick glance and going through everything, you can finally find their citizenship and you can finally find their credit score. But there's a little bit of a problem of what's going on here. I only needed that individual's citizenship, and I also needed that individual's credit score. I didn't need their gender, I didn't need their birthday, I didn't need any of this other information. And if this was a relatively long list, it'd be very cumbersome and very hard to find the fields that I was looking for. So what ended up happening was that software company listened to the concerns of its users. And instead, what it did was it said, okay, now you have this search option, but we also have this drop-down option. And inside this drop-down option, you can pick what fields you want to filter for. So you can write John Doe over here, and then you can say, I want the citizenship, and I also want the credit score. And then what it does is it just gives you the citizenship as well as the credit score, and it omits all the other pieces of information. And that right there is GraphQL in a nutshell. So let's actually talk about what GraphQL is. So GraphQL is a query language which gives the client the power to ask for exactly what they need. And we're going to look into multiple examples and compare RESTful APIs with GraphQL. But GraphQL, in a nutshell, is a query language. So it's a language where we query for data, but we have the ability to ask for exactly what we want. Now, there's more to it than that. There's a lot more things that GraphQL does, but in a nutshell, that is what it is. Now that we have a basic understanding of what GraphQL is and what it provides us, let's start talking about some of the basic benefits of using GraphQL. Now, we saw this a little bit in the last video, but GraphQL prevents overfetching. And let's go through another example to really illustrate this. So over here, let's say we have a website, an e-commerce website, where we are selling our products. So one page would be listing all of our products. We have a product image as well as the product name. So we're listing the products, and when somebody clicks on a particular product, what happens is they get redirected to the product page. Over here we have the image, the title, some product description, and the price. Now let's think about, okay, for this particular page, the product page, if we wanted to fetch the data for that particular product page, what would we have to do? Well, we're going to have our client. So we're going to have our client, and then we're going to have our server. Our server is in charge of interacting with the database, manipulating the data in some way, and then returning it to the client. Now, in order to select a specific set of data, we have an endpoint. So that we have to hit a specific endpoint that is defined in this server. And so the endpoint that we might hit is something like product/1. So this is saying, hey, I want the product with an ID of 1. And our server is like, okay, not a problem. I am going to respond with that data. I'm going to respond with the data of product that has an ID of 1. And let me just zoom in the response here. The response could look something like this. So we get an object back, and we have the name, product, description, which we need. We also have the price, which we need. And we also have the image, which we need. We also have the created at, when this product was created. Okay, doesn't seem like we need that here, but we got it. We also have the rating. It also doesn't seem like we need it here, but we got it. But it doesn't seem that bad. Most of the data that we are using. So this seems okay. Now let's start talking about the products page. So over here we have the products page. And what we might do is we're going to hit another endpoint in our API called products. And what this does is it gets all of our products. So it's going to give us an array of objects. And so we might get something that looks like this. And let's just zoom in here a little bit. So this we can kind of symbolize as an array of objects. You can see here we have the name, the description, the price, the image, the created at, the rating for every single entity. Now the only problem here is, well, for this page, even though, yes, I am going for the same exact data, I do not need a lot of these things. All I need is the name and the image. As you can see here, we have an image and we have a name. I don't need the description. I don't need the created at. I don't need the rating. I don't need the price. I just need the name and the image. So you can see that this is getting a little bit cumbersome. So let's try to fix this. Let's try to fix this overfetching, because that's exactly what we're doing. We're overfetching data. I only needed the image and the name, but I'm getting all this additional data. So let's fix this with GraphQL. So with GraphQL, instead of hitting a particular endpoint, what we do is we define the structure of data that we want back. And we do that through a query that looks something like this. And if this doesn't make sense to you, that is a-okay. We're going to go into this in a lot of detail. But understand that in GraphQL, what we're doing is we're defining the structure of the data. So over here, we're saying that, hey, I want to query something. Okay, what do I want to query? Well, I want to query all of the products. Okay, that's awesome. Now, inside of the products, we have multiple things. We have name, description, price, image, created at, and rating. What is it that you want? Well, I want the image and I want the name. That's it. For this particular page, that is exactly what I want. And you know what? That's exactly what it gives you. It gives you the name, the image for every single entity. And that is what is extremely powerful about GraphQL. You can see here we're getting exactly the data that we want. Now let's go through this exact same scenario, but with the product page. So we might have a query that looks like this. So instead of products, we have something like product. We supply it with an ID. And over here, we're going to say, I want the image, the name, the description, and the price. So we're omitting the created at, and we're omitting the rating. You can see here, we could get something like this. We get the name, the description, the price, the image. Again, for this particular page, we're asking for exactly what we want, and we're getting exactly what we want. And again, do not worry about the query. We're going to go into that in great detail throughout this course. All right, so let's just quickly compare REST versus GraphQL. So with REST, this is the data that we get back when we want to call that endpoint to get the array of products. So you can see here, there's a lot of data. Over here, on the other hand, well, there's very little data. We're getting back exactly what we want. And let's also look at the other example. Over here, we are getting everything for that one product, whereas here we're getting, again, exactly what it is that we want. So I think that proves to you that one of the huge benefits of GraphQL is that it prevents overfetching. But here's the thing, it actually also prevents underfetching. You might be surprised, but it does do that as well. And we'll get to that in the next section. In the last section, we learned about how GraphQL prevents overfetching. In this section, we're going to learn how it actually prevents underfetching. So to do that, let's say that we made a slight improvement to our e-commerce website. We are now able to showcase all of the products in a particular category. So over here, let's say we are in the pots and pan category, and what we do is we display all of the products inside of the pots and pan category, and no products that are outside of that category. So to do this inside of REST, what we might have to do is something like this. So the first thing that we have to do is make a call to get the information about the category itself. So over here we have this endpoint, and we're making a call to this endpoint. So /category/1. And this is going to give us the information about that particular category. So it could be the ID, and then it also could be the category itself, the category name, and then maybe some other information. But you can see here that this is not the data that we need. This is part of the data that we need. We do need information about the category, but we also need information about the products. So you can see here that we're, to a certain degree, underfetching the data that we want. So to get the data that we want, we might have to make another call. So once we get our category, we're going to have to go and make a call like /products/category/1 to get all of the products in the category with an ID of 1. And there we go, we could get that data. And this right here is also kind of an underfetch. Over here, we're only getting the products, but we're not getting the category, but we got the category from a separate route. So you can see here, we had to make 2 calls because for each call, we're underfetching the data that we want. And this is not great. As you can see here, 2 calls. So 2 calls, we have to wait for the response for each call before we're actually able to render our page. And this is not that great from a development standpoint. It would be great if we can just make 1 call. Well, as you can imagine, GraphQL is to the rescue. So what we could do is something like this. So we can say, hey, I want to query data. What do I want to query? Well, I want to query a category with the ID of 1. I want to get the name, so I want to get the name of the category, and I also want to get all of the products inside of that particular category. So you can see here that this products lives inside of this category. Again, if this doesn't make much sense to you, it's okay, we're going to learn through it. But what's magical about GraphQL is we're always relating our data together. So here we're saying that a category has multiple products within it. So you can say here that here's a field, products. Now from products, what do we want? Well, we want the image and the name. So in this case, we're actually getting all of the data that we want. So we're not underfetching, and we're also not overfetching. Because if you go back, yes, we were underfetching the first call, and then the second call, we were still to a certain degree underfetching, even though we have all of our data. But once we have all of our data, we are overfetching. I don't need all of this information. But over here, in 1 call, I am getting the category name, and I'm getting all of the products, images, and the product name associated to that category. So again, we are not underfetching, and we are also not overfetching. And we could get something like this. So over here, we could get an object where we have the name, and then a products array where we have the name, image, name, image. And that's pretty much it. So that is how we are going to prevent underfetching with GraphQL. In this section, what I want to do is really focus in on this query. Again, you don't have to understand the query right now, and if it doesn't make much sense to you, that is okay. But what I want to say is, how are we able to do something like this, where we are querying for a specific category, we're getting the name of the category, and then we're querying for the products inside of that category. So we're querying for the products, and then we're getting the image, and then we are also getting the name. How are we able to do something like this? Well, the reason why we can do something like this is the way that we relate data together in GraphQL. GraphQL is very, very strictly typed, and we have to relate our data together as we create it. So for example, let's say we have created a category entity. All right, that is awesome. And then we created a products entity. Well, now what we have to do is relate the data together. We have to relate the category entity to the product entity. Now, how do we relate it? Well, we can choose how we relate it. In this case, let's say we relate it in a one-to-many relationship. So one category can have multiple products, and any one product can only belong to one category. Of course, there's situations where a product can have multiple categories, but for this use case, let's just simplify it and let's say a product can only have one category, and a category, of course, can have multiple products. And that is why we're able to do a query like this, where we are able to query for a category and then get an array of all of the products. And of course, we're getting their image as well as their name. Now, with something like this, we can, of course, go the other way around. We can also query for the product, and then we can get its category. So we can do something like, hey, I want to get the product with the ID of 1, I want to get its name, I want to get its image, but I also want to get its category. And this is just going to return an object where we have the category name. So that's what's so powerful about GraphQL. We can really ask for anything that we want as long as our data is interconnected. Now, of course, as we create our application, it's going to get more and more complex. It might look something like this. Actually, it's going to look even more complex than this. So let's say we have an image entity. So let's say our image is not just a simple string, but it includes a bunch of different fields. So over here, we can say that a category has one image, so in a one-to-one relationship. And over here, a category can have a one-to-many relationship with products. And then maybe a product can have multiple images as well. So we can have a one-to-many relationship. So you can see here, we can relate our data and we can create queries to query for the exact data that we want. Now, if you are familiar with data structures, this data structure right here is actually known as a graph data structure, where we are interconnecting our nodes together. And that is exactly why this is called GraphQL. So it's a graph query language, because we are relating our data inside of a graph, and then we are querying our data through that graph. And that is exactly why it's called GraphQL. And it's really important to know that, because this is how we are going to be designing our GraphQL schemas. So that's awesome, and I'll see you guys in the next section. Now that we have learned about what GraphQL is and what problems it solves, let's get our hands dirty and start coding out a GraphQL API. Now, before we do that, we need to set up our local environment, and that is exactly what we are going to do inside of this video. And luckily, it's actually going to be really easy across different operating systems. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to link you to this GitHub repo. Right here, we have all of the code that is going to exist for all 3 projects that we're going to create throughout this course. So anytime you feel stuck, you can always come back here and refer to this repo. So that's the first thing I wanted to note. Now let's get on with setup. So we're going to be using JavaScript and Node to build our GraphQL server. So for this, what we need to do is install Node. So go to nodejs.org and just simply install the most recommended for most users version right over here. A really simple download. I already downloaded it. It's super simple. You just have to follow a wizard and then you're pretty much done. Now, just to check if you are done or not, what you can do is you can open up your terminal. So you can open up your terminal, and I'm going to do CD just to go to my desktop directory. And you can just simply say node version. And if you get a version, that means you have successfully installed Node. Awesome. So once you do that, what I want you to do is install VS Code. VS Code is a great text editor that we're going to use in order to code out our applications. And it has a lot of great GraphQL extensions that we're actually going to utilize. And this right here is actually VS Code. And I actually have a project opened up that we're going to work on. So once you guys are further in the course, you're going to be working with relatively complex projects, as you can see. So over here, what we're going to do is we're just going to close this off. So we're going to go to a new window. And what I want you to do is I want you to go over here to the extensions. So to the extensions, I'm gonna just zoom out a little bit. And I want you to go here to GraphQL. So GraphQL, and I want you to install this library or this extension right over here. Go ahead and install it because it's gonna give us great syntax highlighting. And once we do that, we are absolutely done with the setup. So all you really need is Node as well as just VS Code and give this extension an install. That's pretty much it. And I'll see you guys in the next video where we're gonna get our hands dirty and actually code some things out. Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new video. In this video, what we're gonna do is actually spin up our GraphQL server. Now, before you do that, you need to have an understanding of exactly what it is that we're going to be building. Well, we're going to be building an application for a client, and this is the client over here. And what he wants is a very simple e-commerce application where he can showcase all of his products. So he needs a GraphQL server that is able to serve him those product data. And specifically, what we need is the name of the product, description, quantity, price, and the on sale status. This right here is simply a Boolean indicating whether this is on sale or not. So he was kind enough to give us some designs, and we have seen these designs before actually. Right here, this is the products page. This right here showcases all of the products in his e-commerce application. So as you can see here, we have the image as well as the name, and we have multiple of them. Now, if we decide to click on one, well, we get shown the product page. So this has the image, the name, the description, as well as the price. So that's pretty much it, and we need to build a GraphQL server to accommodate all of this data that he needs. So you know what? Let's just get right into it. Awesome. So to do this, well, of course, we need to create a GraphQL server. Now, there's multiple ways to create a GraphQL server. And the best way to actually figure this out is to go to graphql.org. And over here, you can see there's so many languages that GraphQL supports. Now, in these sections, or in this whole course, what we're going to do is simply use JavaScript. But if you are a Go developer and you want to develop a GraphQL server with Go, click on Go. PHP, you can see here it supports many languages, almost all of the popular ones. So what we want to do is we want to click on JavaScript. And over here, you can see, go to the server section. Now here there's multiple different libraries that we can utilize in order to build a GraphQL server. We have GraphQL.js, we have Apollo server, we have Express GraphQL, we have GraphQL Helix, GraphQL Yoga. So there's a million different libraries that we can utilize. Now, the differences between the libraries is usually just syntactical. At the end of the day, they really work the exact same way. So if you know how to use, Apollo server, you're probably going to figure out very easily how to use GraphQL.js, Express GraphQL, GraphQL Helix, etc. Really, the way that they work is very similar. And the one that we're going to be using for our crash course is Apollo server. It's really popular. It's adopted by a bunch of companies these days. It's really cool. So that's exactly what we are going to utilize, Apollo server. And as you can see here, this is actually kind of showing us a snippet as to how we are going to run this. So you know what? Let's just get right into it. So let us go over here. I'm on my desktop. And what we need to do is create a brand new app. So let me just zoom in here a little bit for you guys. Zoom in as much as I can. This is my terminal. So go ahead and do that. And over here, what we need to do is let's move into my desktop directory. And in here, I'm going to create an e-commerce app. So I did mkdir make directory e-commerce app. If this doesn't work for you, just go to your desktop directory and just create a folder called e-commerce app. So now what we can do is, because we created this, so this e-commerce app, I'm going to go ahead and open up VS Code. Remember, this is the code editor that we are going to be using. Now again, oops, this is opening up. Let's just close this right here. So I'm going to close this. Where is close? Let's go open folder. And what I want to do is I want to go to desktop and I want to open up my e-commerce app. So my e-commerce app is completely empty at this point. Awesome. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to open up the integrated terminal and I want to initialize a new node project. So we can do that with npm init-y. So let's go ahead and do that. And we should see a package.json file right over here. Now what we want to do is, of course, we want to create our Apollo server. So let's go over here and inside of our terminal, let me clear this. We're going to do an npm install Apollo server, and we're also going to install GraphQL, which is needed to run our GraphQL queries and mutations, which we'll talk about in a bit, don't worry. So we're just doing npm install for this. This shouldn't take too long. I hope at least it shouldn't take too long. All right, so once that's installed, that's awesome. We got it. Now what we need is a place for our GraphQL server to live. Now I'm going to store the GraphQL server inside of the index.js file. This is where I am going to create this server. So right in here, create a index.js file in the root directory. And again, this is where we're going to create it. So to create a server, what we need to do is we need to get something from Apollo server. So we're going to require something. So this is the node syntax for importing something from Apollo server. So it would look something like this. So const, we're going to get something that I didn't specify yet, equal require Apollo server. And what we want to get is Apollo server. So Apollo server. And we can use this. So this is going to be a way that we can instantiate a new server. So we can do now const server is equal to new Apollo server. So we can go ahead and invoke this. And this right here is our Apollo server. So we can actually go ahead at the very bottom and say something like server.listen. So now we want to actually listen to our server. And then this is going to be asynchronous. So we're going to append a .then. And then we're going to extract the URL from the callback because we get back a URL. And then we can go ahead and just, once we listen, we can just say we can run a callback that is logging that the server is ready at, and then we can just say plus URL. So at whatever this URL is. So let's actually try to run this. So let's go over here to our terminal. And what I'm going to do is I am going to execute a command. So the way that we can execute a specific file in Node is by saying node and then that file. Now I'm in the same directory that the index.js file is living in. So it's going to interpret this as the index.js file, which is this one right over here. So let's go ahead and execute this. And you can see that we're getting an error. Now the reason why we're getting an error is with our server, we need to specify the type definitions and our resolvers. Now I don't really want to get into it too much at the moment, but we need to specify it in order to get our application up and running. So let's just talk about it a little bit. What exactly is a type definition and what exactly is a resolver? So when creating a GraphQL server, you have to specify two things: the type definitions, or in other words, the schema, or the resolvers. So let's talk about the schema first. The schema is the way that our data is going to look. So the way that our query is going to look, the way that our mutation is going to look, the way that our posts are going to look. It's just a way that we can specify how our data looks like. Our resolvers are actual functions that return the data that conforms to the way that we have specified them in the schema. So let me just quickly look at an example. So over here, this is a schema, and we're saying here that we have fruits. So this right here, we have this property called fruits, and what it's doing is it's returning an array of strings. So that's what we're doing. We're returning an array of strings. So right here inside of the schema, or the type definitions, we are simply saying that, hey, we have a property called fruits, and what it should return is an array of strings. Over here, we are going to have a resolver. So right here, this is not returning the data. This is just defining how it's going to look, how our data is going to look. Over here, what we're going to say is, okay, this is the resolver, and this is actually going to return, it's a function that's actually going to return an array of strings. So you can see here, this is a, well, in this case, it's a method, function method. For now, we'll just assume that they're exactly the same. So over here, we have this function, and it is returning an array of strings. And we're actually going to go ahead, so over here, we're going to query for the string using the schema, and then we're going to utilize the resolver to actually get back the data. So that's exactly what this means. So I hope that makes sense, and we'll look at it in great detail. But for now, we need to provide it in order to get our server to run. So the first thing, again, we have to define the type definitions. Now, to define the type definitions, we need to get something else from Apollo server, and that is GQL. So GQL, very important thing to get from Apollo server. So what we can say here is we can say const, and we can say type definitions, and this is going to be equal to GQL. And in GQL, that's where we're going to provide our type definitions. But we need to provide them inside of these backticks. So we're going to do GQL, and then we're going to do 2 backticks. And this is to the left of the 1 key press. So over here, we're going to, right in the middle, we're going to have an enter. And then in here, we're going to define our type definitions. So to define a type definition, we have to say type. That's the first thing. And then we have to define, okay, well, what in our data do we want to define? So right now, let's define our query. Our query is the way that we are going to fetch data. So what we want to do is we want to define our query. So that's what we want to say. We want to define our query. Now, over here, we can have an object, and then in here, we can specify all of the things that we're able to fetch. So for now, let's just very simply say hello. So this, we have this property called hello, and what it can do is return a string. So we have this hello, and it's returning a string. Very simple. And now what we have to do as well is we need a resolvers. We need a bunch of resolvers. So over here, we're going to say resolvers, and this is going to be an object. Now, what is it that we're trying to resolve? Well, we're trying to resolve the hello property that is inside of the query type. So we're going to say query, and this also is going to be an object. And then in here, we're going to have our function or our method that is hello. And what we're going to do here is we're going to return a string like we have specified. So I'm going to say something like hello world. And that's all we need. So I hope that makes sense. We'll talk about this in great detail a little bit later. Do not worry if this doesn't make any sense to you. But again, right here, we're defining how our query is going to look. Right here, we have a function that is returning a string because that's exactly what we specified inside of our type definitions. So over here, let's add our type defs, and let's add our resolvers. All right, don't mind the police noise, guys. This is really loud. Hopefully it goes away. But now what we can do is let's go ahead now and let's go and run node index. And it's actually getting a little bit unbearable. Okay, I think it left. Awesome. So now let's do node index. So now you can see that our application is actually up and running on localhost 4000. So let us go to localhost 4000. And what we get is this playground. So Apollo has this really cool playground that will allow us to test our GraphQL server. So right here, this is kind of simulating how we would do it in the client. So let's go here and let's just click X. And in here, as you can see, we're going to have this playground over here. And what we want to do is we want to query. So anytime we want to query, what we're going to say is query. So query. Now in here, well, we have specified that we have this hello property. Let me zoom in here a little bit. Actually, I'll zoom out. We have this hello property that returns a string. And anytime that you are a little bit confused, you can actually go to the schema. And you can see here in the query, we have this hello property that returns a string. That is exactly what we defined. So in here, what we can actually do is say hello, and that's really all we have to do. We're going to say, hey, I want to query for hello, and this should return a string. And if I were to run this, I get the data world. So what it does is, again, here's our query, and our resolver right here is named the exact same thing, which is hello as well, and it's returning the string world. And that is exactly what I'm getting back. If, of course, I were to change this back over here to something like this, and I have to restart my server, so close it and restart it again. And now if I were to run it again, you can see I will get world. So again, I hope this is making a lot of sense. We have our type definitions, which is defining how our data is going to look. And then over here, the resolvers that actually end up returning our data. And right now you can see that we have our server up and running. Alright, my good friends, so we have set this up, and hopefully this is making a little bit more sense, exactly what the type definitions are as well as what the resolvers are. Now over here we have defined that the property hello is going to return a string. Now I want to specifically talk about this portion over here. This portion right over here is known as a scalar type. So what we're saying here is that this property is going to return a string. So it's going to return a string. And again, the string is a scalar type. Now there's two different types of things that we can return in GraphQL. We can either return something that is scalar, or we can return an object type. Object types are a little bit more complicated, and we'll get to that in the future sections. But for now, I want to make this as simple as possible and just talk about scalar types. So there's a few different scalar types. I'm going to go over here and just write a comment. So right now we have defined that a string, well, we know that that is a scalar type. But another scalar type is an integer. So an integer is also a scalar type. So over here we can say an integer. Another scalar type is a float. So an integer is something like 4, 3, 4, something that is rounded. Whereas a float is anything that has a decimal. So that is another scalar type. Now, another scalar type is Boolean. So this is going to be true or false. And I think that pretty much sums up all of the different scalar types that we have. So string, int, float, and Boolean. So these are just things like string that are just going to be, returning like one thing. So either a string or a Boolean or a number. So now let's actually create some queries and some resolvers in order to return these scalar types. Okay. So the first thing that we want to do is let's actually work with integer, because we already worked with the string. Let's work with the integer first. So let's go here, and now let's say that we want to add another property. So all we have to do that is just press enter, and then when we press enter, all we would have to say is what we want to call this property. Let's call this property, I don't know, number of animals, something like this. And we're going to say that this is an int. So this is a number. Okay, so now what we can do is over here inside of our resolver, we have to somehow resolve for this. So we need to create a new method inside of this query object called number of animals. And over here, well, this is going to be a function. And simply right now, what we need to do is return an integer. Let's return 55. So let's go here. And of course, what we need to do is restart our server. So let's go here, close it off, let's clear, and let's do a node index. And now if you go to our schema here, you can see that our schema has hello property that returns a string, number of animals that returns an integer. So let's go back to our explorer, or our playground I like to call it. So we can query for hello. Now we can also query for the number of animals. So you can see here, we can get hello, we can also get the number of animals. Now one thing I want to note is these types are strict. So right here, by defining the type, what I can't do is return maybe the string 55. If I try to do this, well, I guess it works. Well, let me try to return, maybe not the string, maybe try to return this over here. So I'm gonna go ahead and return this, and oh, okay. So the reason why this is not working, and this is so annoying, and we'll fix this later, don't worry. We need to restart our server. So let's do here, let's do node index. And don't worry, we'll find a way where we can hot refresh everything. So now if I were to run this again, you can see here that type int cannot be represented by a non-integer value. And this is not an integer. So this has to be an integer. Let's go here and we'll fix that later. So that is the int type. And now of course here what we want is, let's add a float. So maybe a good thing for float is price. So we're gonna say here float. And then over here we're gonna have, you know, something like price. And over here we're gonna have let's have it return, you know, this number. And of course here let's have it return a real number. Now over here, as you can see, we have a decimal. So this will work for us because it is a float. So we can say node index, start up our server again. We can say something like price now, and we can get back a float. Now the last thing that I want to look at is Boolean values. So let's just say is cool. I'm not very cool, so I'm gonna have this as a Boolean. And now what we can say here is cool. And again, remember the resolvers, the name of the resolvers has to match the property that we have defined here in order for the GraphQL to know exactly what resolver is attached to what property. And so over here, I'm not very cool, so I'm gonna return false. Again, so annoying, but we're gonna have to restart our server. So we do control clear or control C, and then over here we can just do node index. Start that up again, is cool, and then we can execute this. Now another thing that I want to talk about, another scalar property that is used all the time is ID. And this is actually used all the time when we want to input something inside of our properties. So we want to have some sort of argument. So and this is usually a unique identifier to a specific record. But we'll talk about this a little bit later. For now, we'll just leave it as is. Okay, so that pretty much sums up these scalar types. Now, one thing I want to note is, what if over here inside of hello, we're specifying that we want to return a string. So we want to return this string. Now, what if instead of returning a string, I return null? So let's see what happens here. So let's do node index, and I'm just going to say hello, and I'm going to execute this. And wait, it doesn't return a string, it actually returns null. So why is this happening? Well, here by default, if we just specify the scalar type, we're saying that it could be a string or nothing. And nothing in programming is null. So it could be a string or null. And we're doing the same thing with the int, the float, the Boolean. If we don't want to have that flexibility, if we want to say that this absolutely has to be a string, and if it's null, we want to throw an error, then we have to attach this bang. So this exclamation mark, we have to prepend it. So right now, if I were to save this, and I were to open this, run it again, now if I were to execute this, it's saying here cannot return null for non-nullable field. So this is how we make sure that we get back a string. Now there's a lot of cases where we would want to return null. So this isn't something that we always want to add, and we'll look at the times where we want to add it versus we don't want to add it. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. I hope this really gets it clear to your head as to how we can, how GraphQL works with type definitions as well as resolvers. So this is getting a little bit messy, so let's just get rid of these three. Let's get rid of this, and let's get rid of these resolvers for now. And that's pretty much it. So yeah, hope that makes a lot of sense, and I'll see you guys in the next video. In this video, what we're going to focus on is returning back arrays. So right now we have been returning a bunch of scalar types, and it's just the scalar type itself. So just the string or the integer or whatever. However, there are times when we want to maybe return an array of strings or an array of numbers or an array of floats, array of booleans. So there's times where we want to do this. Now, how do we specify that maybe instead of returning a string, we want to return an array of strings? Well, that's very easy. The first thing that we have to do is specify, well, an array. So we have to specify an array. Now, over inside of the array, what we need to do is specify that, well, what type do we want to return? So we don't want to just return an array. We, of course, want to return an array of things. Now, what is it that we want that to be inside of our array? Well, we want our array to contain strings. So now what we can do here in our resolver is say, hello, my good friend. So return an array of strings. And that is exactly how we can specify that we want to return an array of something. Again, in this case, it's strings, but of course we can change this to int, float, boolean, or whatever. So let's go give this a quick go. Let's go clear this up, and let's just do a node index. And over here, what we can do is we can go to, let's go here. And now let's execute hello, and you can see that I'm getting an array of strings. Now, here's something that I want to note. So what if I changed, my to null? So I changed my to null. What's going to happen? Again, let's restart this. Let's do node index. And now if I were to run this, you can see I get hello, which is a string, then I get null, and then I get friend. So right here, what we're saying is something very similar to what we've done before. So inside of the array, we want a string, but this could be nullable. So we could get a string or we could get null. To specify that we do not want any null values, it always has to be a string. Inside of the array, right after the type itself, we have to specify a bang. So telling it that, hey, we need to have a value there. So now what we can do is if we try to execute this again with a null value, it's going to fail. Awesome. All right, cool. So now what I want to do is let's try something else now. So now instead of actually returning the array itself, what I'm going to do is return null. So should this work? Try to think about this. Should this work or not? So over here, let's go ahead and restart our server. And this is getting really annoying really fast. So I'm going to show you a way how to do this actually probably in the next video. So now what we can do is let's execute this, and this actually works. So this works, but well, we specified that we don't want any null values. Well, here we've specified that inside of the array, we only want strings. We don't want any null value. But the return type of the whole property, it could be an array of strings that don't have any null values, or it could be null. So again, let me specify this. It's kind of like saying this, saying that, hey, we're going to return an array of strings, and we always will have strings inside of the array, or we're going to return null. So to specify that we don't want to return null, we have this bang here as well, saying that we have to have this. And this is honestly the very common convention of an array. So more often than not, sometimes with scalar types or object types, so we'll talk about a little bit later, we need to think about, hey, whether we want to return it or not. But when it comes to arrays, we typically have this convention where we have this bang over here and this bang over here. Because if we want to, if you don't want to have anything, we don't want to really return anything, then might as well just return an empty array instead of null. And then inside, we probably should have values rather than have null. So let's go ahead and save that. And let's restart our server. And now if we were to execute this, you can see that this fails. So right there, this is how we work with array types in GQL. So every single time we had to make a change inside of our application, we had to restart and rerun our server. And that is really annoying. And instead, what I would like to do is anytime I make a change, something can actually detect the change itself and then just restart my server automatically so I don't have to do it. This is really getting annoying for me. And there's actually a way that we can do it, thankfully. So let's actually close our server and let's clear this up. And in order to do this, what we can do is install something called nodemon. And what this will allow us to do is to watch any changes and restart our server automatically. So to do this, what we want to do is install this globally. So do an npm install nodemon and then with -g flag to install it globally. Now I already did this, so I'm not going to do it again, but you go ahead and do it yourself, please, if you don't want to go through all this pain. Once you have this installed, what we can do is we can go to our package.json, and inside of our script, we can create a brand new script. So over here, this is something that we are going to execute in order to run our application in development mode with nodemon. So we can say dev, and nodemon is going to work exactly the same way. So over here, we used to say something like node index, but this time we're going to say nodemon index. And now what we can do is go here and we can say something like npm run dev, and then we get something that looks like this. So now our application is up and running and we can see this thing. Now if I were to execute this, you can see that it fails. Awesome, that's because we're returning null here. But now if I were to go and I change this to this, and I were to run it, there we go. It automatically reruns it without me having to do it every single time. Now let's go back to what we had before, hello world, and this is going to be just a normal little string. Awesome, and of course now this is going to work automatically. In this video, what we're going to do is create the query so that we can query for all of the products. Now, right here, remember that a product has a name, a string, a quantity, a price, and an on sale status. So let's just go ahead right now, keeping that in mind, and let's just write the query inside of our type definitions. So we want to have a property called products. And now here's the question. What do we want to return? Well, we can't return a string because, well, we want the name, description, quantity, price, and an on sale status. And right here, you can imagine that this is a string, this is a string, quantity is an integer, price is a float, and then the on sale status is a boolean. So what is it that we are going to return? Well, right now, we can't really return any scalar type. We have to instead return an object type, because at the end of the day, this is going to be an object representing all of the values for a specific product. So how do we represent this? Well, to represent this, we have to define how our product is going to look. And of course, we're going to do that inside of our type definitions. So now we're going to have a new type called product. And then in here, we have to define how is it going to look. Well, we know how it's going to look. We're going to have a name that is a string, and let's make this non-nullable. A description that is a string. Let's also make this non-nullable. And we also want to have a quantity that is an integer, non-nullable. Let's make it a price, float, non-nullable, and also an on sale status that is a boolean. So over here, we have defined how our product is going to look. Now what we have to do is define how our product queries is going to look. So when we query for products, what do we want to return? Well, I want to return, well, a product. I want to return a product. So over here, what we can do is return that product. And specifically, actually for products, we want to return an array of products. So an array of products, and let's make it non-nullable inside and out. And this right here is actually a different type than the scalar types. So you can see here that this is actually an object type and is comprised of many properties that have scalar types. Now, an object type could be comprised of many properties that have many scalar types as well as other object types. And we'll look at that in more and more detail a little bit later. But this right here is an object type, and we're gonna see a lot of those, actually a lot more than scalar types inside of our query. So I hope this makes sense. So over here, we're returning products, and this is gonna return an object, an array of objects, where each object is gonna look something like this. It's gonna have a name, description, property, price, on sale status, and these are the associated types. Awesome. So now what we need to do, of course, is to resolve this. So over here, what we can do is we can say products, and we need to create a function for this. And what we need to do is return an array of objects, and they have to have the exact same properties. So it has to have a name that is a string. So let's just say bike, a description. I don't know, let's say that this is a mountain bike. That is a string. Mountain bike. And over here, we're gonna say an int, so quantity, how much do we have in stock? Let's say 20. Let's say price is 99.99. And then lastly, is it on sale? Let's say false, it's not on sale. And so now what we can do, well, so now this is actually returning an array of that object, which is specified in the schema. So now what we can do is let's go over here and let's check out our schema. You can see here that we have a product that's going to return an array of products, and these are the scalar types of that product. So we can go here and we can simply say we want to query for something. Well, we want to query for products. Now let's try to execute this. It doesn't work. So let me just show you, when we did hello, that it was just a scalar type. It worked. We didn't have to do anything else. But now, because this is a product or an object type, what we have to do is specify what properties we want to get back. Because remember, GraphQL is something that allows you to specify what you want to get back. It's just not going to return everything back. That's just basically rest at that point. We want to specify what we want to get back. So to specify what we want to get back, we have an object here, and then we can say, I want to get back the name. I want to get back the price. And now you can see here that we can get back an array of, well, objects, and we have also specified the properties that we want. So we're not getting more than what we want. So awesome. That is terrific. That is really, really cool. So now what I want to do is, instead of having this kind of data over here, I want to have a lot more data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to link my GitHub page inside of this video. And what I want you to do is to go over here, and I'll link this specific page over here, and take this array of products. So just take this whole thing. Take this whole thing. And also what I'm gonna want you to do is to go over here, maybe right above here, and just paste it in there. So over here we have this array. Inside of this array, we have all of these objects that conform to what we have. Awesome. All right, so now over here, what we can do is very simply, inside of our resolver, instead of returning this, they can just simply return the products. So let's go ahead and save that. And then if we were to go over here and we were to execute this, you can see that we get back all of our wonderful data. Now that we have set up the products query, let's actually write the query to get the data for this page over here. So remember, over here we need an array of objects. Each object should have an image. Each object should have the product name. And we only want that data. We want nothing more, nothing less. So I encourage you to do this on your own. Go to Apollo, go to the Apollo GraphQL Studio, and write a query where we're able to get that specific data. Well, I'm gonna give you guys 3 seconds to pause the video. 3, 2, 1. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and do it. The first thing we need to do is define that we want to do a query. The reason why we have to do this is because we could do something called a mutation or a subscription. We want to, of course, define that we're doing a query. So that's exactly what we're gonna be doing, a query. So that's the very first thing, query. Now, what do we want to query? Well, let's go to our type definitions. We only have 2 options here. We can either query hello or we can query products. In this case, we're going to query products. So let's say products. And because products is not a scalar type, it's an object type, we have to define what we want. And that's good because, well, what do we want? We just want the image as well as the product name. So over here, we're going to say name, and we're also going to say image, which of course we forgot to define right over here. So let's actually go ahead and define that right now. And then we're going to say image. And what's great about this is that our data has the image, but of course we didn't define it over here. And this is actually a good example. Let's actually just go ahead and get rid of this for now. And let's save this. And now we're not able to actually query for images, even though our data is returning it, because, well, we can't. There's no such thing as image in the data. So right now, let's go ahead over here and let's define that we want an image inside of our product type. So we're going to say image, and we're going to say that this is a string, and we absolutely do need it. All right, awesome. So now what we can do is we can actually go ahead and query for this, and you can see that we get steel as well as image 1, salad, image 2, spoon, image 3, etc., etc. And that is exactly the data that we need in order to, and let me just open this up a little bit. Remember, we have an array of objects here, name and image. That's exactly the data that we need to create this page. That's awesome. So now let's actually create the query for this page over here. Now that we have created the logic to query for multiple products, let's actually create the logic to query for just one product. So what do I mean by that? Well, right now we're getting back an array of objects with this products query. But what I want to do is, well, sometimes I just want to get back one object, and this is needed to create this page over here. So I just want to get back one specific product, and I want to get back the image, the price, the description, as well as the name, so I can render the data right over here. Okay, so how do I go about doing that? Well, right now in our queries, we have this products, and this returns an array of the product type over here. We actually now, what we need is something else called product. So this is not products, this is just singular. And this is just going to return one product. And this could potentially return nothing, so we'll actually leave it as nullable. Okay, that is awesome. But what we also need to do is somehow uniquely identify which product that we want. So do we want this golf clubs, or do we want the baseball gloves, or the fertilizers? We need to somehow uniquely identify it. And we do that through passing variables. So what do I mean by that? Well, over here, what we're going to have to do is somehow uniquely identify which one we want. And what is the best way to uniquely identify which product we want? Well, the best way is probably to use the ID. So what we might want to do is when we actually query for a product, we also pass in the ID of the product that we want. So again, if I wanted the golf clubs, then I would pass in this ID over here when I'm running that query. So how do I do that inside of this type definition? How do I define that? Well, very simply, you have your parentheses, and then you say ID, and then you define the type of the type of the parameter. So over here we can say that this is a string, and we can also add the exclamation mark to notify that you absolutely need to provide this if you want to run this query. And for now, let's actually just go ahead and save this, and let's go here and let's write query. And we're gonna say product this time. So we're gonna say product. And of course we can ask for description, the name, but it's yelling at us at this point because we also have to supply it with an ID. So we also have to supply it with some sort of ID. Okay, awesome. Now one thing that I want to note is that we gave this the type of string. So we gave this right over here the type of string. But it's actually better to give this a very specific scalar type known as the type of ID. At the end of the day, it's going to behave the same, but this is more blatant, telling you exactly what this is. All right, awesome. And of course, you can see here that it is working the exact same way. If we refresh, it is not yelling at us one bit. Okay, cool. All right, so now that we have created this, now what we need to do is, well, create the resolver that is going to return that data. And this resolver is going to be a little bit more complicated than the ones that we have created thus far. So right now let's create a resolver, and this has to match the name that we have provided here, so product. And then we have an arrow function, and of course what we need to do is iterate through this products array and find the object that has the ID that we have passed in. So if we passed in this ID, well, it has to return just this object over here. So here's a good question. Right here, okay, we have defined, let's go back to our query, we have defined that we wanted a product and we have supplied it with this ID over here. How do we get that ID inside of the resolver? Well, the resolver has 3 parameters that we can utilize: the parent, the args, and then the context. For now, let's ignore the parent, let's ignore the context, and we're just going to focus on the args. The args is going to be an object that is going to contain all of the parameters that we have supplied. So over here, what we can say is parent, args, and then context. Even though we're not going to be using the parent and context for now, we will be using the argument. So let's just go ahead and let's just console.log the args. Let's just do that. Let's open up our terminal and let's go over here. And simply what I want to do is go and run this query, and we should get back, well, right now we get back null, and this is perfectly valid because we can say that, well, we didn't find it, so we're going to return back null. But now let's copy this, and you can see here that the args is an ID, which we of course defined right over here, and it is the string, whatever this is. So we can actually utilize this. So we can utilize this over here. So we can say that the const, let's call this product ID, is equal to the args dot ID, and this should give us whatever the ID is. And then what we can say is const product, and that's going to be equal to, well, we're going to have to iterate through the products array. We're going to have to find, so we're going to have to find the, oops, what is going on here? We have to find, well, the product, where the product ID is equal to the product ID that we have gotten from the arguments. So over here, we have this. So again, let's just quickly iterate what we're doing here. This is just simple JavaScript. I hope you guys understand this. But we have products.find, and then we're iterating through every single product. And what we're doing is we're returning the first instance where the product ID is equal to the product ID that we have supplied inside of our args.id. So now what we can do is, if we don't find a product ID, we can just simply return null, and then else we can just return the product itself. So let's go ahead and save this. And now if we go back over here and we run this query, well, we still get null, and this is expected. But now let's actually supply it with a real ID. So let's go here, and let's say I want a basketball. Let's go to the basketball section, whereas I love basketball. So let's go here. We're going to supply it with this ID. So let's supply it with this ID. And now if we were to run this query, we're asking for the name as well as the name as well as the description. So let's run this, and you can see here that that's exactly what we get back. We get back the name and the description. So now let's actually write the query to get the data for this. So we need the image, the name, the description, as well as the price. So let's go here. So we need the name. Let's go here, we need the name. Let's just order it. Really, the order doesn't matter, it's just an object, but just for semantic purposes. Name, description, price, and then the image. And if we were to execute this, you can see we get basketball, outdoor basketball, which is a description, the price, as well as the image. And just to prove to you that this works for every single one, we can also say the spoon. I want to query for the spoon data. And if I were to execute this, you can see spoon, description, price, and image. Well, we're done, folks. We created what the client needs, and the client, they don't have any more iterations, so that's terrific. That is the end of the course. Of course not. Of course, that's not the end of the course, and of course, clients continuously add more features, and that's okay as long as they pay us. Now, this client in particular was so happy with his page, so happy with his e-commerce website, that he wanted to add categories to the website. So he wanted to be able to group products into specific categories. And really, there's just two fields that are necessary for each category: the name of the category, as well as the associated products for that category. That is all he needs. And this is a relatively new concept because right now we do not know how to relate data together. But after implementing the categories, we will know how to do that. And here's the mock-up design. This is what he wants. We have a category, and then someone's able to click on a particular category, and then we display all of the products for that category. So let's go ahead and do right now something similar that we did to the products. What we're going to do is we're going to create a query that is able to query a list of all the categories. And then we're also going to have a query that is able to query just one category. And in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to somehow relate the products to the category. Now this is extremely similar, pretty much identical to what we did to the products. So I highly suggest that you try to implement this on your own. If you can't, well, it's completely fine. I'm going to do it right now. Okay, cool. So let us get right into it. Now I'm going to have to open up my text editor, and here it is. Okay, cool. So the first thing that we need is data for the categories. And on Udemy, I also linked the data over here. We can grab this data, and we really have a few categories. We only have 3 categories that we can add. So let's add these 3 categories here. So we have categories, we have an ID, a name. So this is the category kitchen. And over here we have the name garden, and over here we have sports. So we only have 3 categories. And as you can imagine, steel, pot, salad, bowl, spoon, they're gonna go to kitchen. And then shovel, fertilizer, they're going to go to garden, basketball, golf clubs, baseball gloves, and soccer ball. They're going to go to the sports category. But we're going to connect them together a little bit later. So what is the first thing that we need to do? Well, we have a brand new type, and this is the category type. So let's go ahead and define this inside of our type definitions. Remember, the type definitions is the place where we define the structure of our data. So let's go ahead and let's do that right now. We're going to say type, and we're going to say category. So type category, and we're going to say very simply that all we want to expose is the name. So what we want to do is expose the name. All right, and this is of course not type name, it's going to be of type string. But now that I think about it, and this is just thinking about it from a front end perspective, what we might want to do is, well, let's go back to Apollo over here. You can see here, we are actually, when we are querying for a specific product, we have to pass in the ID. How in the world is that front end is going to know what the ID of that is if we don't also pass that to the client via GraphQL? So over here, let's actually supply it with the ID, and we can give this a type of ID. And similarly over here, we're gonna say ID, type of ID. All right, that is awesome. And now what we can do is if we were to ask for the ID and execute this, we also get the ID, and that is terrific. That's exactly what we want. All right, so we have the type, which is really cool. But now we also have to define it in the query, because right now we can't query for it because we didn't define it as something that we can query. You can't query for a category. So we have to say that, hey, we want to query for categories. So let's say here, categories. We're going to say that this is an array of category, and we're going to say that this is non-nullable. So if there's no categories, it should just return an empty array. It should never return null. And this is actually a best practice, and I'll talk about design patterns in great detail a little bit later, but this is actually a really good practice. And also inside of the array, we should never have null as well. It should always be an object. We should never be null. So over here we have categories. Okay, that's awesome. So now what we can do is actually query for categories. You can query for their ID as well as their name, but of course we're going to get an error because, well, we are returning null because we're not resolving it yet. In the meanwhile, let's actually go ahead and let's create the other query type for getting just one category. So we're going to say category. This one's going to take in an ID. And this one's simply going to return just one category. And this one will be nullable because what if we provide it with an invalid ID and it doesn't return anything? Well, I want it to return null. It's not going to return a category, so let's just keep it as nullable. Okay, cool. Now, of course, what we need to do is resolve these. So in the query, we need to create those methods to resolve them. So the first thing that we need to do is let's resolve the categories. This one's really simple. This one, all we're going to do is simply just return the categories array that we have created over here. Let's save that. And now if we were to execute this, you can see here, we get that data. That's awesome. All right, cool. This one, the category, is a little bit more complicated, but hopefully it's not too complicated. We kind of understand it. Let's remember we have the parent as well as the args, and then as well as the context. And actually for now, let's add this to every single resolver, even though we might not be using it, just for good practice, even this resolver, just for good practice. Now let's go here. And what we want to do, of course, is to find the category where the ID matches the one in the arguments. Remember, over here we have specified that if you want to run this query, you have to provide us an ID. All right, this is awesome. So simply what we're going to do is just return, and actually we're not going to do that for now. What we're going to do is something similar to what we have done here. So what we can do is we can actually destructure out the ID from the args. So instead of doing something like this, we can just destructure out the ID from the args. And what we can do is, well, simply just do const, and then let's do category, and this is going to be equal to, you know what? I'm not sure if the find method returns null or not, because if it does return null, if nothing is found, I think that would be more ideal. So let's actually try that. If not, we'll just do what I did before. So we're going to do categories dot find, and then we're going to say category, and then the category dot ID must equal to the ID inside of the args. That's it. So what this will do is it's going to find the category where the category ID is equal to the category ID, or the ID inside of the args. And if it doesn't, I'm pretty sure it returns null. So let's actually go ahead and give this a go. So over here, let's query for category. And as you can see here, this is a little bit of weird syntax. And there's actually multiple different ways that we can actually query for our data. This is actually how we're going to query for our data in the front end. You can see here, this is a variable known as, well, $category ID, and we're injecting it over here. So one thing that we could do to run the same query is go here, go to our variables, and we can actually assign the variable in here. And that's going to run exactly the same as we have been doing thus far. So let's just grab a category ID for now. Where did I paste this? Where are these wonderful categories? I should probably cut them out and paste them above the type definitions. That would make definitely more sense. And let's just take garden, the ID for garden. Let's paste that in there. And if I were to run this, something is wrong. Oh yeah, now we need to, of course, we need to ask for something. We can never just make a query and not ask for something. So let's go ahead and run this, and you can see that this works. Now the thing I want to test is, okay, if I change this to C, which is an ID that doesn't match, it does return null. Okay, so it does return null, which is awesome. Okay, so that's pretty much it. And actually now what we can do is just completely refactor this. So let's just simply do return here, and let's just get rid of this, just to really simplify our code. All right, that is pretty much it. And also what we could do if you want to, I didn't do that before just to be a little bit more clear, but we can destructure out the ID in the args and just say ID, just to be more consistent and a little bit more clear. All right, so that's pretty much it. That's awesome. But again, what does the user want? He wants us to query for a specific category, which is okay. So let's change this back to B, run that. But what we also want to do is get back an array of products. That is the difficult part, where we are actually relating data together. So how are we going to do that? Well, I'll show you in the next section. In this section, what we have to address is how we can query a category and its associated products. So at the end of the day, what we ultimately want is a query that kind of looks like this. So we have the categories, we're querying for the ID as well as the name, but then we can also query for the products associated to the category. And of course, the products is an object type, so then we can select exactly what we want. Maybe we want the name, we want the ID, whatever it is that we want. So we want to have a query that looks like this, that returns the ID, the name, as well as the products, which is an array of objects. All right, so how are we going to do something like this? Well, let's first begin with the type definitions. So let's go over here to the type definitions. And inside of the category type definitions, let's define that we can get products. So we can also get the products. And this is going to be an array of the product type right over here. So we're going to say that inside of the array, we cannot have any null, and outside of the array, or we either have an array or an empty array or a filled array, but we'll never have null. So we can have that with the exclamation mark. And that's all we have to do. Now what we can actually do is ask for products. So we can go ahead and ask for products. We can ask for the name. We can ask for whatever it is that we want. So we could really do whatever it is that we want. But of course, when I run this, well, we're getting a null value here because we need to resolve it. Now, here's a question. Where do we resolve this? Usually when we're resolving things, we have this query object and we're resolving all of the values inside, or all the properties inside of this query object. So hello, products, product, category, and category. Categories and category. Now in this case, this is a little bit different. This is not in the query schema. It's actually in a separate type definition, the category object. So how do we resolve the products for a specific category? Well, in this case, we need to create a resolver for the category and not the query. And so what we're going to do here is, instead of having a resolver for the query, we're going to have a resolver for the category. This is going to be an object, and in here we're going to have all of our methods. Now in here, what we can do is resolve for the products. So we can go ahead and resolve for the products that is invoked when we query for the categories. So over here, we're going to have the method, and we're going to use the parent, and we're going to use args, and we're going to have context as well. And then what we want to do is somehow find all of the products associated with this category. So the first thing that we actually need to do is change our data a little bit, because we need to somehow associate a product to a category. So for example, over here we have soccer ball. We want to somehow associate this to this category over here, the sports category. Now, how do we do that? Well, typically the way that we associate data together is through having some sort of foreign ID within the object that we are trying to relate to the other object. So for example, if over here we want to relate the products to the sports category, what we can do here is in the products, we can have a category ID, and this can be equal to this ID over here. So this can be equal to this ID over here. And that way we know that, okay, this product is associated with the category with this ID, and the category with this ID is this object right over here, so sports. So we can do the same thing for the other ones. So let's actually go here. Let's copy this, and let's paste that in there for baseball gloves, as well as golf clubs, and then basketball. And then for the other two, we're going to use gardening. So over here, for fertilizer as well as shovel, this is the gardening category. So category, or category ID, is going to be this. And let's save that here as well. And then the last one is spoon, salad bowl, and steel pot, which of course would fall into the kitchen category. So let's go ahead and let's add that in there, category ID, and we're gonna go ahead and paste that in there as well. So we're gonna have to paste that in there. And now we can actually relate the products to the categories. All right, awesome. So that's pretty much it. Okay, so now what we need to do is somehow in this resolver, so inside of this resolver, we need to return only the products that of that specific category. So for example, right here, what I'm doing, and let me just get rid of this for now. So right here, this ID is associated to the garden category. And I want to just return the products that are associated to that specific category. Now again, how do we define things here? Well, we define the products, we grouped the products with the category by having this foreign ID right over here. So somehow what we need to do is to get the ID of the category that is being called. So in this case, this is the garden category, and it has an ID of this. Well, how do we get that? Well, this actually, right here, this whole category is the parent to the child, which is the products. Because remember, the child is actually nested within the category. And this is where, inside of the resolver, we're going to use the parent keyword right over here. And just to prove to you, or param, not keyword. So, and just to prove to you what this is doing, let's go here. And simply, all I want to do inside of this resolver is to console.log the parent. So let's console.log the parent. Let's go ahead and console.log that. And then what I want to do here is let's call products. And this is going to fail, but the log won't. We will be able to log this. So let's run this. It's going to fail over here. But as you can see, that here, the parent, which is the category that we invoked, has this ID, and it is garden. Now, of course, if I were to change this to, let's change it to this ID, which is going to be the sports ID. So let's change that over here. Run this. Now you can see we get the sports ID as well as, or the ID for the sports as well as the name. All right, this is awesome. That's exactly what we need. So let's actually put this back down here. So now what we can get is the category ID. So what we can say is, okay, well, const category ID is equal to parent.id, because that's the category ID. And then what we could do is filter for every single product that has that category ID. So what we can say is here, return, and then we can say products, and then .filter, and we can filter for each product. And what we'll do is we'll return the product that has a category ID equal to the parent category ID. So really, really simple. Okay. And just to actually, you know, I was thinking of destructuring it, but let's just make it super clear. So we'll just leave it like this. And now what we can do is if I were to run this, you can see now that it actually works. So you can see here that I have the category. Let's get rid of the ID for now because the ID is very long and annoying. You can see here that I have the sports category and I have an array of products. So you can see here we have the name, we have the name because that's all we're asking for, but of course we can ask for more. We can ask for the price, we can ask for the quantity because we're returning that whole object. And you can see here now we're able to group things together. Now let's actually let's pick another one. Let's pick kitchen for now. And let's go here and let's change this to the kitchen ID. And just to prove to you that this works, if I were to run this, you can see here, now we have the products for the kitchen. Isn't that incredible? Like, I just feel like that's just awesome. It's really, really cool. Okay, so this is terrific. This is wonderful. I can't stress that enough. I love GraphQL. That's why my very first Udemy course is a GraphQL Udemy course. But now, let's say I want to do the opposite. Let's say I want to list I'm listing a product or multiple products, and I want to get the category for each product. How do we do that? So we're kind of flipping it here. Now, the way that we do it is extremely similar, so I highly suggest that you try it on your own. If you don't get it, that's okay, because we're going to address it in the next video. We set up the category products relationship, but now let's set up the product category relationship. And this is going to be extremely similar to what we already did. So I highly encourage that you guys do it on your own and then watch the video if you guys are stuck. But you know what? I'll give you guys 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to get right into it. Okay, so the first thing I always like to do is change the schema. So let's change the schema. So over here in the products, along with all these scalar types, I also want to get the category. So let's say that we want the category, and this is not going to be an array of categories because in our application we defined that one category will belong to multiple products, and one product will belong to only one. Or products will belong to only one category. So that's how we defined it, and thus it's not going to be an array of categories. So we can say something like category, and then we can say that this is going to be of type category that we have defined here. Now, in this case, we could potentially leave it as null, and I think it might be a good idea. Maybe in the future, we might have products that we don't group into categories. If we want to make it mandatory that a product has a category, we could make this non-nullable. But for now, let's just leave it as nullable. Okay, so now we have defined this. So now what we can do is run a query that looks like this. So we can query for the products, let's say, products or product, doesn't matter. Say products. And then we can also query, so we can query for the name, and then we can query for the category. And inside of the category, we can ask for the name and ID. Okay, of course, right now, this is, well, it is going to work because everything is nullable. But now what we need to do is to resolve this. So let's go over here. And how are we going to resolve it? Well, now you can see here, inside of the product type, we have an object type. So this is a non-scalar type. So to resolve this, what we need to do is to go to our resolvers right over here. And inside of our resolvers, we have to create the product. And then in here, we have to create a method called category. And this, of course, is going to take parent, args, as well as the context. Now remember, the parent in this case is going to be the product that we call it with. So it's going to be whatever product that we call it with. Now, if you're calling products, the parent in this case for the first instance is going to be steel pot. And then the other instance, salad bowl, and so on and so on. Okay, awesome. So what do we do here? Well, we just want, simply, all we really want to do is find one category so we want to find the category that has the category ID of that specific product. So for at this product, we want to find the category that has this ID, and which is, in this case, sports. That's really all we want to do. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get that category ID. So what we can say is const category ID is equal to parent, and then this is going to be parent dot category ID, because remember the parent in this case is the product. Okay, cool. And now what we want to do is very simply just find. So we want to iterate through the categories, and we want to find the category where the category ID is equal to the category ID that we got from the parent. That's it. Very, very simple. So let's save that here. And now if I were to run this query, it fails for some odd reason. Now let's actually debug this. I wasn't expecting it to fail. Let's actually debug it together. So why did it fail? So it says here that our application has crashed. Let's see why it has crashed. So something defined in the resolvers, but not in the schema. So something was defined in the resolvers, but not in the schema. Okay, so we have category, we have product, and okay, I just misspelled category. There we go. That's what was wrong. So this right here, category was defined in the resolver, but not in the schema, but I misspelled it. That's why it was erroring out. So now if we were to run this, another error. So cannot query field category on type product. Did I just misspell it again? Oh, okay. Oh yeah, nope. I have to change this. And there we go. There we go. Excuse me guys, sorry about that. But now you can see, oh no, I don't want the ID. Get rid of the ID. I wanted the name. So now you can see here for each product we have the name, and then we also have the category. We have the name and we also have the category. And one really cool thing is then inside of the category itself, we can also get the products. So we can get this kind of inner loop of things. Because remember, everything is related to one another in a graph. So we can get an array of the products. So we get the product name, and then we have the category, and then we get all of the products inside of that category. And believe it or not, what we can do is inside of the products also ask for the category again. So we can have this inner loop. Of course, we probably don't want to do this, but just to prove to you how powerful GraphQL is, that's why I'm doing it. All right, awesome. So now we're actually able to, we completed the client's requirement, and now we're able to group categories or group products into a specific category and query for them. That's awesome. We now have quite a bit of logic inside of our application. But one thing that I want to note is that everything is housed in one single file. So we have our data inside of this file. We also have our type definitions inside of this file. And we also have our resolvers inside of this file. And honestly, the more we start adding functionality, the messier this is going to get. And that's not going to be very maintainable. So before adding more logic, let's actually think of a way where we can organize our file structure. And that is exactly what we're going to be doing. So instead of housing everything inside of the index.js, we're going to split up the logic so that we can have, well, more organization, and thus we can maintain our code a lot better. All right, so let's get right into it. So the first thing that I think we can do is move the type definitions. Right now we have it housed over here. I think we can remove it into its own file. So typically what's done is we create a schema.js file, and then what we can do is go ahead and just copy the schema itself and cut it out. And what we can do is just have it inside of this file, and we can actually export this. So we can say exports.type definition is equal to this. Now, instead of relying it on this index.js file, now we can just import it in. So we can do import, and we can say we want the type definitions, and then we're going to want that from, well, the schema. So let's go to the schema. And that is the first thing. And if I were to save this and run this again, you can see that it has completely failed for some reason. And let's actually open up the terminal to determine why. So let's close this, open that. Okay, so we have an error. Now what is that error? Okay, I actually know exactly what the error is. As you can see in the schema, we have this GQL. Of course, what we need to do is import that in as well, because we haven't imported that. So we can get rid of it inside of the index.js file, and we can require it inside of the schema.js file. And now what we can do is just save that, and now everything is up and running. Awesome. So as you can see, we have, well, drastically decreased the size of these things. All right, awesome. The next thing that we can do is probably remove the data. So let's remove this data. And I'm going to cut this data out, and I'm going to add this data in a separate file as well called db.js. This is going to act as our database for now. We can have that in there, and then at the very bottom, we can do something like module.exports, and that can be equal to an object where we have the products, and then we also have the category, so categories. So save that, and we cut that out. So now what we can do here is, let's close this, is we can import these things in, and we can actually auto import them. So we can just say products, and you can see here that it auto imports, and then categories, auto imports. Awesome. So we'll save that, and that seems to be working just fine. All right, let's run this again. Everything seems okay. And now what we want to do is to get rid of our, well, we don't want to get rid of the resolvers, but we want to move them out of this file. Now, typically with resolvers, as you can see here, we have multiple different resolvers. We have resolvers for our query, we have resolvers for our category, we have resolvers for our product. It's not typical to store all these resolvers into one file. It's actually more typical to have a resolvers folder, and then for each different thing that we want to resolve, so whether it's query, category, or product, we have its own file, because these resolvers can get very, very long really fast. So over here, let's have a query.js file. And then in here, what we can simply do is get rid of this. Let's copy that. Let's get rid of that. And so what we can do here is exports.query is equal to this. All right, so that's the very first thing. And please, guys, do not mind my cat. I think this is almost feeding time. So after this lecture, I'm going to give him some food. All right, and then over here, we have category.js. All right, and we can say here exports.category is equal to this. Save that. And then similarly over here, what we want to do is we want to get the products. So in here, we can say product.js, and then let us get this, and let's do an exports.product is equal to this. Now, one thing that I want to note is that these resolvers, what they do is they actually rely on the data, so the DB. So right now we're actually using it in here, but we need to actually import it in here as well. So for now, let's just get rid of all of our resolvers. We're going to get rid of all of these resolvers. And what we're going to need to do is define our resolvers inside of the object. So what we need to do is get rid of this for now. And we need to define our resolvers that we have inside of these files. So what we can say is query in here. That didn't work. I was hoping it would auto import, but it didn't, unfortunately. So let's just import it ourselves. So let's go ahead and, okay, it seems like my cat is very mad at me. So I'm going to pause the video and I will be right back. All right, I went ahead and did the important thing, of course, and fed the cat. And now what I can do is, from our resolvers, what I want to do is I want to get the category, the product, as well as the query. So first of all, let's go ahead and let's get the query. So we're going to get the query. And now what we want to do is get the others. So let's get the category. And we want to get the, what do we want to get? Well, we want to get the product as well. So from here, we want to get the category, and then from here we want to get the product. And then in here we can define the query as well as the category as well as the product. Now again, one thing that I quickly need to note is that inside of these resolvers, we need access to the categories data. And so what we'd have to do for now, and I'll talk about a better way of doing this, but for now, let's just go ahead and let's just import in or require in the data that we require. So from here, we need the categories data. Okay, so let's just require that in. So from the database, what we want is the categories. Let's copy that and save that in here. From here, we need the products data. So let's paste that in there as well. So we're going to say products. And then lastly, in our queries, we need the products as well as the categories. So we need both. So let's go here. And so we want categories and products. So now if we were to save this, you can see our index.js file is much, much smaller. And that's exactly what we want. And let's just make sure that everything is running. Let's open our terminal. Let's delete that extra terminal. You can see everything is still running, but let's just double check that we can still run our application, and we can. And if we can make this query, I'm pretty sure we can make any query, because this query, it really resolves everything. And you can see here that this is a much better way of organizing our application. And that's typically actually how things are done inside of a typical production-based GraphQL application. So usually the schema is one large file, unless it's unbearingly large, then there's ways to split it up. But usually it's actually in just one file. And then over here we have our resolvers in different files, and then we have our index.js, which is obviously the thing that creates the server. Now that we have reorganized our file structure, this is looking a lot more organized. But one thing that's bothering me a little bit is, well, for each resolver, I have to go ahead and import each data from the DB directory. And this can get really, really annoying. Won't it be great if we could just pass this somehow, pass all of the necessary data to every single resolver in our application without having to require it into the file? Of course it would be great. And we can actually do that with the third parameter, the context parameter. So the context parameter is essentially something where we can pass it in inside of the index.js. We can define it over here inside of the server, and that is going to be found in every single resolver that we have in our application. So let's actually just go through a quick example. So inside of our server, what we can also define optionally is the context. So we can define the context. And let's say inside of the context, I have a method that console.logs hello. So I'm going to say hello, and this is simply a method that console.logs hello, my friends. Hello, my friends. And it console.logs it incorrectly in terms of capital case. That's fine. Now, because I actually put this in the context, now what I can do is I can go to the property or categories or query, and I can go into any resolver and actually access that method. So let me just show you what I mean. So over here, let's just console.log the context. Let's console.log this context. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to console.log this context. I'm going to have to execute this query. Let's do that right now. And you can see here that this object right here, the say hello method, is living inside of the context. The reason why we have it so many times is because remember, our query is very much nested, and thus there are multiple products being called that are querying for categories. But you can see here that, okay, we have access to this say hello method, and thus consequently what we could possibly do is say, hey, we want the say hello method from the context. So we can say we want it from the context, and then we can just invoke this method. So we can go ahead and invoke it. And now if I were to run this, we should see many hello, my friends. All right, this is terrific. So you probably get the idea of what we want to do. What might be better, I think, is if we actually went ahead and we got this, and we just imported it once inside of the index.js file. And of course, you have to fix the directory and we have to get the products. So you have to get the products. And then in here, we got this and we passed it into the context. So we passed it into the context. And then what we'll be able to do is actually access the categories data from the context. And we can also do something like this. So we can do something like const categories is equal to context.categories. We can most definitely do that. But maybe a better approach is to just destructure out the, to just go ahead and destructure out the categories from the context, because that's exactly what we need. And actually, with that being said, we can probably do the same thing with the args. So you can see here, or actually here we're using the parent. So we can use the same thing with the parent. So we're destructuring out the category ID. So why not just destructure that out as well? So let's go here, let's destructure that out. Now we don't even need this. Now we have just a one-liner. So if we were to save this, this should still work as expected. Let's do the same thing over here. Now let's get rid of this. And over here, what we want is we want to get the products. So let's get that. So we're gonna get the products. And then here, what we want to get is the ID. But over here, as you can see, we renamed it to category ID. So we could do something like ID and then rename it to category ID. So we could do that. So essentially here, what we're doing is we're getting the ID from the parent, but we're renaming it as category ID. So we can get rid of that now, and we can save that. Same thing, should work. And lastly, over here, we have a bunch of resolvers. So let's get rid of this. And then from our context, we don't need anything for this resolver because this resolver is kind of a stupid resolver. Over here, we need the products because we're just returning the products. So let's get rid of the products. And then here, we also want the products. Okay, so over here we also want the products. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna access the products. And also, let's just go ahead and access the ID from the args. So we can get rid of this. And then over here, we just want the categories. That's in our context, remember? Categories, awesome. And then over here, we can destructure out the ID. And over here, we can also destructure out the categories. We can get rid of this. Okay, that seems pretty awesome actually. Let's save that. A lot simpler, everything runs. Now, if we run this query and it is successful, we know that everything is working fine, and it is. We are now almost done, but our client has a brand new requirement. So over here we have the product page, and of course we built out the query for the product page. But now the client wants the ability to scroll down, and then once you scroll down, you're able to see a list of reviews, and each review should have a title, a comment, a rating. And so we're supposed to add this list of reviews to all the associated products. And also the reviews should have a date associated with them as well. So that is the new requirement, and we need the ability to query for this data. All right, so let's actually just write the logic, and we're gonna do all of the logic in one video. And this is gonna be immensely similar to all the things that we've done thus far. There's nothing new about this. So again, I do highly encourage you to pause this video and try it out on your own. But if not, we're gonna go ahead and gonna add these things, and this is gonna be extra practice for us. Okay, let's go ahead and do that right now. So to do this, of course, we need reviews data. So on Udemy, you linked everything that you need. So just go ahead and copy this data. And let's just examine the data real quick. So let's go here, and inside of our DB, let's go ahead and paste this data in. And this is reviews. And you can see that each review, and let me close this down and as well this. So each review, let's scroll all the way up. Each review has an ID, each review has a date, each review has a title, and then each review has a comment, each review has a rating, and then each review has a product ID. And this product ID should actually be the UUID. So that is my mistake in copying and pasting. I'll fix that for you guys. But each review should have a product ID that is linking that review to the whatever the product is. So in this case, steel pot is the product. So very, very simple. We've done this before. Now, of course, what we want to do is export this. So we're going to say reviews. Go ahead and save that. And what we want to do is have access to that in whatever resolver. And so to have access to that, let's just go ahead and put that reviews inside of the context. So we're going to say reviews, and we're going to get that and put it into the context. Okay. So what's the first thing that we have to do? Well, the first thing that we have to do is go to our schema and then define exactly what the review is. So we have to define the type review. Now the type review has an ID that is, well, of type ID. The type review is also going to have a date, and you might be thinking we can use the type date, but there's actually no type date in GraphQL. So instead, what we would have to utilize is just simply a string. So that's really all we would have to utilize. And that's honestly okay, because at the end of the day, the date is going to be used as a string. And of course, all these things we're going to make non-nullable. Okay, so we got the ID, we got the date. What else do we need? So we have the title, and then the comment, and then the rating. So let's say the title, which is going to be a string, the comment, which is going to be also a string, and then lastly the rating. So the rating, we're going to make that an integer. Okay, now here's a good design question that we might want to ask ourselves. Are we ever going to need a scenario where we query for a review and then we get its product from that review? I don't think so. Based on this design, what we want to do is query a product and get the reviews for the product, not the other way around. So we could very, very easily say product here and have product. But personally, I don't think this is necessary, and I don't think we should over-engineer our application. Instead, what we should do is go to product, and then in here, we would simply say reviews. We would say reviews, and then we would say reviews here, or review. So we're going to want an array of reviews. We're going to make it non-nullable. So we have to provide an array of reviews, and then inside we're going to also make this non-nullable. Okay, cool. And so that's pretty much it. So now what we need to do is very simply, so we added a new object type inside of the product. So now what we need to do is go to the product resolver and resolve these reviews. So let's go to the product resolver in here. And what we want to do now is, well, resolve the reviews. So let's go here, let's add this method. And so from the method, remember, we got the parent, we got the args, we got the context. Now from the context, what do we want? Well, obviously we want the reviews. Okay, so we want the reviews from that. Now, if you go back to the data, you can see here that each review has an ID that is associated to the parent, of course. So what we need to do is actually access the ID of the parent. So we need to access that ID from the parent. So we need to go ahead and access that, and then compare it to the review dot product ID. And so that's really all we have to do. So let's go here and let's just simply return. It's going to be a very simple query actually. So we're going to do reviews, and we're going to filter, and then we're going to go for each review. We are going to return the review.id that is equal to, or sorry, not ID, dot product ID that is equal to the ID. And that's it. That's all we have to do. Very, very simple. So once you really get the hang of it, it gets really simple. So let's actually just make a very simple query. Let's make a query that would successfully give us this. So let's go here and let's say query, and we want to query for the product. So we want to query for one product, and I hate when it does that. I just want to say product, and let's give it an ID of, let's get the steel pot. I don't have an ID for it in that query, so let's just go steal an ID from here. We're gonna go ahead and take this steel pot ID. Let's go ahead and query for that. And so what do we want here? Well, let's go back to our design. We want the image, the title, the description, the price. So we want the name, I guess, the description, the image, and then the price. So that is going to give us, well, this data, but we also need this data over here, the reviews. So what we're gonna say here is we also want the reviews, and because this is an object type, we have to specify what we want. Well, we want, what is it that we want? Rating. Why is rating capitalized? Did I make that capitalized? That is very strange if I did do that. Let's go to the type definitions, and for some reason this is capitalized as well as this. That's very strange of me. Why did I do that? Let's copy and paste that back. So what we want is, well, we want the title, we want the comment, we want the rating. I believe that's it based on the designs. Yes, that's it. Let's run that. And you can see that it works completely fine. So you can see this guy was really unhappy with it. This is bad. When I bought this, it broke the stove. So this guy bought this steel pot and somehow it broke his stove. I guess it's a really bad pot. And then this guy said this is good. One of the most decent pots he's ever used. Is okay. So I guess people are not really fans of this pot. So it's okay. It is, yes, it is decent, I guess. And then terrible. Why is it so expensive? So I guess people are not very fond of this pot, I guess. But you can see here now we're able to meet the customer's demand and have these reviews. So our client now has another request. So far, when we query for the products, we get all of the products inside of our database. So we go ahead and we display it all. Now, if the products is within a category, of course, we get all of the products within that category. But we want to have, or the client wants to have, more fine-tuned filtering. For example, when we query for the products, he wants to have the ability to query for all the products that are on sale. So maybe he can have a drop down where users can select, okay, I want to see all the products that are on sale, whether the products are listed within the category or just the product page itself. We want to have that ability. So to do that, what we might do is we have products here, and then in products we can have a parameter. And the parameter can be filter, which is going to be an object. And then over here, as a property within this object, we can have an on sale status. And if that is true, then we're going to only query the products that are on sale. If it is false or not even defined at all, then we just return all of the products themselves. Now, so far we have been dealing with params within GraphQL, but we have been dealing with scalar params. We haven't been dealing with parameters that are objects. And this is going to be a little bit more challenging and a little bit more different. But it's not going to be hard. Do not worry. It's not that difficult. It's a little bit more challenging, but it's still really easy. So let's get into it. Let's go ahead and implement this. Now, quick note, the reason why I want to have it as an object is because we might have additional filters later on. Right now we have on sale, but we could have maybe a rating status, and that's kind of hinting to what we're going to be doing later. Maybe we want to have rating, and we want to see, I want to get all of the products that are above 5 stars or above 4 stars, for example. So that's why we have it as an object. All right, so let's just get right into it. Okay. So over here, what we want to do, so let's go to our query. Over here, what we want to do is we want to say that, hey, I want to have a filter object, and this is going to be an object with an on sale status. So this is the filter param, and this is going to be an object with an on sale status. Now you might be thinking we can do something like this. So we can have an object, and then over here we can have on sale, and then we can have a Boolean. But that doesn't work. We have to actually define that type over here. So over here in the product, we actually didn't have to define that type because the param was a scalar type. But now because this is an object and there might be multiple properties within that, we actually have to define it in our schema. And this isn't a type per se, this is rather an input. So we can say here something like product filter or products filter input. So products filter input. And then over here we can say on sale, and we can say that this is a Boolean. So this is a Boolean value. All right, so let's go ahead and let's copy this. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get rid of this, of course. I'm gonna get rid of all that. I'm gonna put that in there, but I'm gonna make this non-nullable. So you do not have to provide this filter. Of course, if I add the exclamation mark, then it's sorry, I'm gonna make it nullable. So we don't have to provide this. If I add the exclamation mark, it becomes non-nullable, meaning we have to define it. But I don't want to have to define it. If I don't define it, I do not want to do any filtering, but I still want to retrieve the products. However, if I do actually define it and I put an on sale status, then yes, I absolutely do want to filter by on sale. Now also the on sale, we're also going to make that non-nullable as well. So we're going to go ahead and not make that non-nullable as well in case we don't care about the on sale status. So let's go ahead and let's implement this. All right, so to do this, now that we have our filter, let's go here. And now inside of our products query, so inside of our products query, we now have to deal with the filtering. So over here, before we weren't even dealing with any filtering, but now we have to deal with the filtering. So it's going to be a little bit more complicated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have our function here, and I'm just going to return products for now. So I'm just going to return all of the products. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to have to extract that filter from the args. So let's go ahead and let's extract that filter. So now I'm going to say here, I'm going to say let filtered products. And initially I'm going to set the filtered products to the non-filtered products over here. All right, and at the end of the day, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and return the filtered products. Okay, so I'm going to say if filter is defined, then what we want to do is we want to start filtering through the products. So in here, we can say if filter, and then we can say dot on sale is equal to true, because remember, filter is an object. So if filter dot on sale is equal to true, then what I want to do is I want to say filter products, or filtered products, this probably makes more sense, filtered products, is equal to filtered products dot filter, and then for each product, what I want to do, and can't really see here, for each product, what I want to do is I want to return product dot and then on sale. And so what this does is it only returns the products that are on sale. So this Boolean value is actually true. So let's go ahead and let's save this. That's really all we have to implement. So now what we can do is go here. Let's go here. Let's give this a quick refresh. Make sure everything is running fine. And let's go ahead and let's write a query for this. So let's just query for all the products. So the products, and let's just get their name, and let's get the on sale status. So let's execute this. So right now we have no filter, and it seems to be working just as fine. But now what we want to do is we want to filter for all of the products that are on sale. So we want to filter for, so we should just get spoon, and we should get fertilizer, we should get basketball, etc. Maybe it'd be nice to also have the price, just to look at, the price. All right, cool. So now what we want to do is we want to add a filter. Let's get rid of that. I hate when that happens. And then what we want to do is we want to say on sale is true. So let's execute this. And as you can see here, we have filtered it. Isn't that absolutely incredible? That is terrific. All right, now let's see if this works also within the categories. So let's go here. And if I say I want the category, and let's say category, I want the sport category. So let's supply it with the ID. So let's go here. Let's find the ID of the sport category. Sport. Where are you? Sports. Those are the reviews. And this is the soccer ball. This is a sport category. All right. So let's go ahead here and let's add that in there. And then also we have to request some things. So what I want to request from this is, let's just get the name for now. Execute that. We get sports. Awesome. Okay. But now what I want to do is I want to get the products. So I want to get the products. And I want to get the name. So let's get the name and the on sale status. So let's execute that. And now what I want to do is, well, maybe I want to filter. And as you can see here, that same functionality isn't present. So what we need to actually do is, similarly to what we have done before, what we need to do is to go to the category resolver, and we need to add similar functionality here. But first, of course, what we need to do is go to the schemas. Where is that? And we need to say that over here we're also able to query for a filtered product. So we can say here, similarly, we can do this. So we can do that as well. And then over here, similar logic. So similar logic, what we can do is maybe just even copy and paste it. We can say in here, we can say const. We can say const. What do we say here? Can't call this products. I want to think, or let's call it category products is equal to this. And then we could say something like, let filtered category products is equal to this. All right. And then we could do literally the exact same logic. So we can copy and paste this as well. So you can go here and we can just paste that in there. And so over here, of course, we're just going to have to replace filtered products with category filtered products. Let's fix that up. And I believe that should theoretically work. I hope it does. Now, of course, what we need to do is in the args, we of course need to extract the filter. So we need to get that filter. And that's pretty much it. So now if I were to save this, and let's just give this another go. Now we should be able to add that filter. And then, so we should get basketball, baseball, and that's it. So we can say on sale and then true. I really hope this works. Let's execute this and it works. Awesome. So you can see here now we can apply that additional filter to additionally filter our products. Isn't that just amazing, you guys? Our client has one more request, and that is to filter products by their average rating. So what he wants to do is add some sort of dropdown that looks like this. And when a user picks one of these options, for example, 3 or greater, we filter for the products that have an average rating of 3 or greater. And this is going to be relatively complex to do because the ratings, we don't have an average rating property. The ratings live within the reviews data. And so what we need to do is aggregate those reviews data for a specific product, find the rating, and then figure out if we want to return that product or not. So it's actually relatively more complicated, but the logic is more complicated, but the way we would do it is exactly the same. So I do highly encourage you to try it out on your own. Now the way that we're going to do it is inside of the filter, what we're going to add is this average rating property. So this average rating property over here, and it's going to be an integer. So over here we supplied it with 4. So in this case, we're going to get all of the ratings that are greater than or equal or greater to 4. So you know what? Let's just get right into it. Now to do this, of course, what we need to do is add that into the filter. So let's go ahead over here and into our schema. what we need to do, I already added it actually, what we need to do is to add the average rating, and we need to say that it is an integer inside of the products filter input. That way, now over here in our query, we can also query for average rating, and then we can supply it with some sort of input value. Now, of course, it's not going to do anything at the moment because we need to, well, resolve it in our resolver. So we have to deal with it in our query resolver. Okay, so that's awesome. But now what we want to do is, okay, if we hit a case where we have filter dot average rating, we want to, well, perform that filtration process, if you will. Now, one thing that we can do, just for simplicity's sake, is destructure out on sale as well as average rating from filter if we have hit this if statement. So we can say from filter, and then over here we can actually simplify this to just on sale because this is going to be a Boolean value. And then over here we can also simplify this using average rating. Now, one thing I want to double check is that the value that they provide us is always either 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So I only want to perform that filtration if the value that they provided us with, it falls within that range. So what we can do, one trick that we can do, is actually put those numbers in an array and then just say dot includes and then the average rating. So what this does is if the average rating is 4, it checks is 4 within this element, if it is, or within this array. If it is, then it returns true. If it's not, it returns false. So if you pass in any number that is not within this array, what we do is just return all of the products. We don't actually perform that filtration process. And for now, I think that's okay. Maybe a better practice later on is just to throw an error, but you know what? To me, that's fine right now. Okay, let's go ahead now. So the first thing that we need to do, the absolute first thing that we need to do is, well, we need to iterate over the filtered products. So let's actually go ahead and do that. So let's do filtered products is equal to filtered products, and then dot filter, because we're of course performing a filtration here. So we're going to say product. We're going to say product here. And then for each product, what we need to do is we need to find out the average value of its reviews. So remember, each product has a product ID, and then in the reviews, each review has a product ID as well. So each product has an ID that correlates to the product ID in the reviews. So that's just a very important thing that you need to understand. All right, that is awesome. Okay, so what we need to do is let's first get all of the reviews for a specific product and just sum them. Let's just do that. So let's just say let sum rating, and initially we're going to set that to 0. And we could do reduce here, but just to really keep the code as simple as possible and as readable as possible, we're just going to iterate over it, and we're going to increment sum rating. So we're going to say reviews dot for each. So for each review, what we want to do is first check if the review dot product ID matches the product dot ID. Then what we want to do is do sum rating plus equals, so this is just incrementing it, by the review dot rating. So the review dot rating. And actually, what we should probably do, and this would probably make a little bit, actually no, we can keep that in there. And then over here, what we can do is let's just console.log the sum rating as well as the product.name. So the product.name. Okay, now let's open up our terminal so we can just see it. And okay, awesome. And just to really simplify this, I'm gonna keep the on sale status here. All right, so let's execute this. And as you can see here, I actually executed this with the reviews as well. So I got the reviews. And so over here, for the basketball, the sum should be 15. And then for the baseball, the sum should just be 5. So let's go ahead and let's run this. Let's go back over here. And it seems as though it is not even running. Why is that? I'm very surprised here. Oh, okay. So I misspelled review here. So let's fix that. So review, awesome. Let's save that now. Execute this again. Okay, are we even hitting this if block? Let's go here. Let's go here. Let's do a console.log. Inside. All right, let's save that. Let's just see if we're even hitting this if block, because it seems as though we're not even hitting it. So let's go here. Very strange. Are we? Oh, okay. Okay. So I know the exact reason why we're not doing this is because we're querying for the products within a specific category, and we don't have that filter in yet. So what we need to do actually is query for the products, and then we need to query for the products. Let's add a filter in it for now, just so we can reduce the number of items we get back. So we're going to say on sale true, and for now let's just say the name as well as the price, and then as well as the reviews, and then let's just get the rating for each review. So we have a few items here. We have the baseball glove, the basketball, the fertilizer, so 4 items. And this is actually good. So now what we can do is just run this query, but this time we need to supply it with an average rating, so we can actually hit that if block. So let's execute that. And now it seems like it's nothing, and that's completely fine. That's exactly what it is. But now you can see that we have computed these values. Okay, terrific. Seems like we computed them correctly. Now, in order to find the average reviews, we need to also store the number of reviews there are. So what we can say here is say number of reviews. Initially, you can say that that's equal to 0. And then over here, what we can do is instead of having just one inline statement, you can say number of reviews plus plus. Okay, so we're getting really close here. So now what we can do is say const average product rating is equal to the sum rating divided by the number of reviews. So the sum rating divided by the number of reviews. So let's go here and let's just console.log that for now. And if I were to execute this, you can see the average reviews is 3, 3, 5, and then 5 over here. Okay, so again, we're getting really close. So now all we want to do is let's go here, and all we want to do here is just return the filtered products, depending on if their average product rating is greater than or equal to the average rating that we have specified. So we can say average product rating is greater than or equal to the average rating that was specified. And that's it. That's all we have to do. So let's go ahead and save this. And now let's try actually executing this. If we execute this, you can see we have basketball, we have baseball, but we don't have, well, whatever else was remaining. I don't remember what it was. If I were to change this to 3, you can see here that we get all of these now. And we can actually get rid of the on sale status. And you can see here that we're able to, if I change this to 1, I'm sure we get all of them. You can see, yeah, well, you guys probably get the point. It filters as we expect. Awesome. So now what we need to do is actually do the exact same thing inside of the categories. So we need to do this exact same thing inside of here. All right, so I just want to just quickly show you that the process of doing this is exactly the same. And I'm actually not going to do it for this section because it's exactly the same, and I don't want to have this repetitive code and make the videos too long, and I want to get to newer concepts. But I do highly encourage you to look at the query and try to implement it on your own for this. And I'll actually have the code for that somewhere on GitHub, so if you actually want to check it out. But we're not going to be using this application that often, So we don't really need to do that for now. Welcome to a brand new section. And in this section, what we're going to be doing is talking about mutations. Now, what are mutations? To explain exactly what they are, let's talk about what we have been doing with GraphQL thus far. So far, we've had our data live somewhere. In our case, it was just in some local variable, but in a production case, of course, it's going to be in a database. But nonetheless, it's stored somewhere, so really it doesn't matter. And really what we're doing is utilizing GraphQL to get this data and return the data that we want in the structure that we want to our client. So for example, if we go over here, you can see here that I'm performing a query and I want the products. I want to get a list of all the products. I want to get the product name as well as the name of their category. So that's the way that I'm structuring the data, but the data is living there anyways. But what if what I wanted to do is ultimately change my data? I wanted to change my data in some way. So whether it is going to be maybe an update, maybe I want to update the price of something, and so I want to update the record. At the end of the day, that is a change. Whether maybe it's a deletion, maybe I want to delete this whole product, or maybe I want to recreate it, and thus a creation. At the end of the day, these three things, even though they're different in what they're doing, they're updating and changing our data in some way. And that right there, the process of manipulating and changing your data is known as a mutation. You're mutating your data. So mutations really is commonly used in genetics, where we talk about how your DNA is mutating and changing its form, changing the alleles, changing the nitrogenous bases structure. Sorry if that doesn't make any sense. I haven't studied biochemistry in quite a long time. But essentially what's happening is your DNA is changing, and thus the proteins that it creates are going to be a little bit different. And that's because, well, essentially the data within your DNA is changing. Now, that is going to be exactly the same in this process. We are mutating our data in some way, whether it is going to be through an update, a creation, or a deletion. So at the end of the day, we're going to be mutating our data. Anytime we change our data in some way, that is a mutation, and we can actually do that through GraphQL. So let me just quickly explain right here. So right here, we have been performing queries. So our data exists, we're just fetching our data, we're not changing our data in any way. But now what we can do is, instead of having this query keyword, what we can do is say mutation. And then in here, we can define as many mutations as we want. And we're going to be adding a lot of mutations. We're going to add mutations for adding categories, adding products, adding reviews, as well as mutations for deletions and updating. So we're going to be doing a lot of mutations, and we're going to learn all about mutations, and it's a very, very important concept in GraphQL. Let's begin by creating the mutation to add a category if we want to do that. So the first thing that we have to do is specify that we want a mutation. Right now we have been doing type query, and we have been defining all of the queries. But now what we want to do is we want to define, well, the type mutation. And what we want to do is have a new mutation called add category. So add category. Add category. Now this mutation is going to result in something that we're eventually going to return. So we should define what we want to return at the end of this mutation. Well, what if we just return the new category that we have created? So we're going to return that new category, and we're going to say that yes, we are going to return this category. All right. Now the thing is we need, well, parameters. We need to define the category we want to create. So as you can see here, the type category, all it has is an ID, and we probably don't want to pass in an ID. We can probably generate that in GraphQL, but we definitely do want to pass in a name. So in here, what we can do is simply say something like name and then string. But I think a better idea is having an input in case we have additional things later on that we need to add. So what we can say here is input, and we can say add category input, and we can say here that this is going to be a name, and we have to pass in the name. And then what we can do here, and this is a very common convention, is we can say input, and then the input is whatever this is. So add category input. So let's go ahead and save this. And now if you were to go to our mutation and say add category input, you can see we have that in there. So we have add category, add category, and we can add the input that we want to add in. I hate when that happens. And then we have this object for the input. And then of course we can specify what we want from the category. So we can specify that we want an ID. We can specify, let me fix that here. We want to specify we want an ID. We want to specify that we want the name. And over here, what we can say is, well, the input, let's say the name of the input is, the new category that we want to add is office supplies, for example. So office supplies. And that is how we would execute this query. Now, of course, we need a resolver for this. Now, we don't have any mutation resolver, so what we can do is simply add a mutation.js. And then similarly to what we have done with the query, we can do the same thing with the mutation. So over here, we can just do exports.mutation, and that is equal to an object. And in here, we can have the add category method. So add category. And then of course here we have the parent, the args, and then the context. So parent, args, context. Now here's the thing. What we need is the arguments. And of course we need the input from the arguments, because that's how we're going to create our data. So let's actually go ahead and let's create it. So the first thing that we need to do is let's just assemble the new category that we want to add. So we're going to say const new category is equal to, and each category, if you go back to the database, each category has an ID. Where are we? Where's the categories? Each category has an ID, which is a UUID and a name. So let's go here and let's say that we want an ID. Oops, apologies for that. We want an ID. Now we need to dynamically generate an ID. And so for this, what we can do is install a package called UUID. So we can do npm install UUID. Let's go ahead and install that. Awesome. We just installed it. Now what we can do is in here, we can get, or we can utilize that package to get this a method that is going to create a UUID for us. Now there's different versions we can get, v1, v2, v4. I'm going to pick v4. I'm going to relabel it as UUID. So essentially now what we can do is UUID, and we can invoke that, and that should generate a new string for us. This is basic JavaScript. I do expect you to know this. All right, so next step is to define the name, and the name we get it from the input. Now one thing that we can do is simply destructure out everything from the input. Right now it doesn't really make much sense, but if this grows larger, this might make a little bit more sense. But right now it's just the name. So we can just go ahead and destructure that out. And that's pretty much it. That's the new category. And now what we want to do is we want to add it to the categories data. So we can just get that from the context, categories. And we can say here, categories.push. And we want to push this new category into it. And that adds it to the database. And then, of course, we said that we want to return that category itself. So we're going to do that. And that's pretty much it. That's really all we have to do. And that is mutating our data. So now what we need to do is inside of our resolvers, we have to add the new mutation. So let's just copy this, paste that in there. We're going to say mutation here as well as mutation here. And we're going to say that we also want to add this mutation. Okay, so now let's actually give this a go. Let's quickly refresh this. And let's just pray that this works. So if we were to execute this right now, what it should do is just simply return the ID and the name of that new category that we wanted to add. So let's go do that. And it seems like it works. That's awesome. Okay, so we have add category, we get the ID, we also get the name. Now let's try actually executing a query. So what I'm going to do here, you can press this button over here to add another tab. So let's actually execute a query where we get all of the categories. So we get them all, we get their name as well as their ID. Why not? Execute. So you can see here we have kitchen, garden, sports, and then office. So we successfully were able to add data. And we did that through a mutation. Now in the next section, and I highly encourage you to do this on your own, we need to add the logic to add a product as well as add a review. So you guys can do that in the next section. Now that we have added the ability to add an additional category inside of our database, let's add the ability to add a product as well as add a review. So that is exactly what we're going to do. And I highly encourage that you kind of do this on your own. So let's go ahead and first of all, let's specify that we want to do a mutation. And right now we only have the ability to add a category. So what we need to do here is define that we want to also have the ability to add a product. So let's go here and we're going to say add product. And here we're going to say add product input. And this is going to return the new product that was created. Very simple. Now this is going to fail because we don't have a product input. So let's go ahead here and let's add that as well. So we're going to say input, add product input. And what we're going to do is let's go to the product. And so we need to provide the name, the description. We need to provide all of these things over here as well as the category ID. We need to provide that as well. So we need to provide all of these things as well as the category ID so we can link this input to a specific category. So now if I were to save this and I were to say add product, well, we should have add product and then we should be able to supply it with an input. And the input should be a bunch of things. Then we should be able to get whatever it is that we want from the product. All right, so let's actually just go through this real quick. So let's just say name. Maybe we want to add a fork, an image of just image 55, whatever, doesn't matter. Let's say price. This is a super expensive fork, $555, and it's so expensive that it's actually on sale as well. And then we have quantity. There's only 2 of these in the world, and we have them in our store. What else do we need here? We also need the category ID, of course. So we want to place this in the kitchen category. So let's get that category ID. I believe we're missing something. What are we missing? What are we missing? So let's see here, quantity, price, description. Did I say description? I don't believe so. So let's say description, gold, diamond, fork. And that's it. So once we execute this, what we should do is get back, we should add that data into the products and get that back. So of course, what we need to do this is to go to our resolvers, and then we're gonna say add product. And then of course, this is gonna take in a parent, the arguments, we're gonna extract the context from that. And we're also gonna extract the products array. And of course, I always forget the colon here. Let's specify that. So this one is really easy as well, very, very similar. So we're gonna destructure out everything from the input, so everything that we need. So what is it that we need? Let's just get all of this. I'm just gonna paste it right in there, and I'm just gonna get rid of the key value pairs, or the value of the key. So I'm gonna destructure all of these out. And okay, cool. And now what we want to do is, okay, we have the input. Now what we want to do is you want to create the new product. So we can say const new product. And what we can also do is check if the category ID is actually a category ID that exists. That's something that we can do additionally, and we're not going to do that for this application just because this is just kind of a quick application just so we can learn GraphQL. In a more complex application, of course, we're going to want to do that as well. But another reason why we might also not want to do this is this category ID is pertaining to a foreign key. And thus, if we try to add a foreign key that actually doesn't exist in our database is going to throw an error and we're not going to be able to add it. So that's another reason why we probably shouldn't really care about this at the moment. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's do const, and we're going to say new product, and we're going to say that this new product is equal to all of these things. So all these things in the input, and then we of course need to specify a new ID. So let's just say UUID, and let's invoke it. Now we have that in there. Awesome. All right, so that's the new product. The next step is to simply push this new product and return it. Really simple. So let's go ahead over here. And what we want to do is we want to do products.push, and we want to push that new product. And then lastly, what we want to do is return that new product. So we're done. That's pretty much it. Let's save that. Now let's give this a go. Let's execute this. You can see that, well, it seems like it's successful. And now let's go over here to the other one, and let's perform some sort of query to get all of the products. Maybe actually let's go get all the categories, get the name of the category, and then get the product, and then get the product name. So let's execute that. And over here you can see for kitchen, we have everything we need in addition to the fork that we have added. So this fork has been added and it is successfully linked to the correct category. Isn't that awesome? Now let's do the exact same thing with the reviews. This is super similar. Highly suggest just do it on your own. Please just try to do it on your own, because at the end of the day, you don't want to kind of go through tutorial hell. You kind of want to do things on your own, and doing things and failing on your own is the best way to practice, to be honest. But if you don't want to do that, or if you have and you want to double check that your work is good, then I'm going to do it right now. So we're going to add another mutation over here. We're going to call this add review. We're also going to call this add review input, and this is going to be a review. Awesome. And now, of course, we need to define our add review input. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So we're going to say input, add review input. Now, what is inside here? Well, we need all of this data. So let's go ahead. We need to define this data, as well as we also need to provide what a product this review is linked to. And we're going to do that through the product ID. All right, awesome. So now what we can do is very simply go over here to the products, and we can say add review, and very similarly parent, we're going to want to extract the input from this, and then what we're going to also want to extract this time is the reviews. So now we can go here, and the first thing we want to do is actually define the reviews, or we want to get the data as it pertains to the reviews. So let's go to our schema, and we want all this data from it. So let's go here, and let's just get rid of all these. All right, so we want to get all of this. And of course over here we can just define our new review. So const new review, and over here we can say similarly to what we have here, we can say that we want to create a brand new ID for this, and then we can copy and paste this here. And then what we can do is very simply just reviews.push, and then we want to push that new review, and then of course we're going to want to return it, because we're saying that we're going to return an object that has the same structure as the review that we defined in the schema. And that's it. That's really all we have to do. Of course, best thing we can do now is just give it a quick little test. So let's go here. Let's define our new mutation. This is going to be add review. Oh my goodness, I hate when this happens. Add review. And then of course you have to define the input. Let's define that. And then over here we have to define what we want to get back. Let's try to get back the comments as well as the rating. Maybe even the title. Why not? Doesn't matter. This really depends on what you want to get back. So this is depending on the query. It doesn't really matter for now. So let's just define the date. We could also do some logic to make sure that this is the correct date format, but for now that's okay. We'll just say this 2020. Well, right now for me it's almost 2022, so let's actually change that to 2022, just so people don't think this course is super out of date. It's 4 months until January 2022. And then what we want to do is we want to have the product ID. So let's say we want to review this fork. So let's actually get its ID right now. So we're going to say this fork. And what else are we going to say? We're going to have to define the title. So expensive. And comment, what not worth the price. A $500 fork, probably not worth the price. And then we can say rating. We can say a 2 because this guy's very generous. I believe that is all that we need. Am I missing something here? Integer value. Oh, sorry. Apologies, my good friends. In the schema, I defined this as an integer when I should have defined this as an ID. So I think that should fix it, and it does. Now before we actually execute this, let's copy this. Let's copy this ID, and let's make a query. Let's make a query to get that specific product as well as its reviews. So we're gonna go here and we're gonna get the product. We're gonna define its ID as this. And for now, let's just ask for its name just so we can make sure that the query is correct and we actually get back the correct thing. Okay, I am very surprised by this. Seems like it has not added. Oh, maybe, the reason for that. Okay, so the reason why that happened was because our server restarted unless it restarted the data. So what we're gonna have to do is perform that mutation to add the product again. So let's do that right now. So we're gonna say mutation. We're gonna say add product. I guess this is good practice. Oh my goodness, this is gonna be so annoying. I hate doing this. So we're gonna say, actually, you know what I can do? Let me just copy this and just revert back to what we had before, to the add product, because I believe that's where that was. All right, let's wait a little bit. Come on, please. There we go. Okay. So, and then let's paste this mutation in here, and then we'll add another one for the query. So the first thing I want to do is I want to add the fork. Okay, I added the fork. Now to prove to you that it actually added, let's go here and let's query for the fork. So we're gonna go ahead and query for that specific fork. So we're gonna say ID is this, and we're gonna say that we want the name, and this should be fork. I hope so. So if you don't know what happened when we made a change and we saved it, it restarted the server, and because we stored it in memory, it restarted that data. So that's exactly why we had to re-query it. Obviously, if we saved our data in a database, that's going to be persistent, and we don't have to do that. But for this reason, we had to. And now let's also ask for the reviews, and we want, let's say, the rating of each review as well as the comment itself. Now this is going to be an empty array for now. But now if we execute this query where we add a review, of course what we need to do now is get this product ID and paste that product ID in here. Now if I were to execute this, we have this addition. And if we were to go here, you can see that we have this new review. I just love GraphQL, guys. Every single time I see this, I just kind of get mesmerized by how amazing this is and how we can really build powerful applications. I guess I just love development. Because this right here, at the end of the day, is kind of very similar to how things like Shopify or Facebook are built. And we have that superpower. In this section, what we're going to do is work on the logic to delete a certain entity. And specifically for this section, we're going to be working on the logic to delete a category. And in the future sections, we're going to also delete a product as well as a review. So let's get right into it. Now, because we're deleting something, we're manipulating our data in some way, and thus we're performing a mutation. So in order to say that we want to delete something inside of our mutations, we have to say that, hey, we want to delete something. And specifically in this case, we want to delete a category. Now let's go back over here into the playground. And over here, I ran this very simple query. So let's go ahead and run this. And you can see here that we get all of our categories. Now, how do we know which one we want to delete? Well, I think the best way to tell the resolver what entity I want to delete is through the ID, because this is a unique identifier. So over here, what we can say is, well, we want you to provide an ID, and this is a scalar type, so we don't have to say that we want to have an input. Now, what is it that we eventually want to return? I don't think it's really appropriate or needed to return the entity that we deleted. We just deleted that entity. We don't really care about it. Similarly, I don't think we really need to return all of the entities without that one entity that we deleted. Again, that's not very important. So maybe I think the best case is some success or failed message. Now, we're going to get into a lot of success and failed message a little bit later, but for now, let's just very simply just either return a Boolean, so true or false. So we're going to return a Boolean. That's what we're going to do. So we're going to return this Boolean. Awesome. All right, so now that we wrote this, and if I were to save this, and if I were to now go to, let's just close all these, let's create new ones. So if I were to now do a mutation where I want to delete a category, you can actually see it. That's awesome. But of course, it's not going to do anything because we need a resolver. Now, here's the thing. The way that we have created our data right over here, we're not going to be able to delete anything. And this is because we have our data as single variables and they live in an outside file. So what we need to do is actually have all those variables inside of a common object. So what we can do instead is something like this. So we can do db, so we can do const, or we can call this const db. So this can be our database, but then we can just export this database. So we can just do exports.db. Now, of course, here we're going to have to do a lot of modification because right now we don't have access to any of these. We only have access to db. And over here, the context, all we'd have to do is just pass in db. And now let's go over here. And now over here, we only have access to db. So we're going to do db.categories. And then over here, similarly, db.reviews. And this kind of is very similar to how an ORM works. And we'll talk about ORMs a little bit later. So over here, we're going to have to say db. And then over here, db.products. And I believe that's it for that. That's good. Now over here, we can do the same exact thing. We can change this to db. And then we can say db.products. And then of course we can, what can we do here? Any other instances? Let's see here, products dot. So that's good, that's fine. Reviews is something that we probably have to do that for. We can do db.reviews. And now over here, this is where it gets a lot simpler. Awesome. So you can say db.products. And then here db.categories. Over here we could change this to db as well as this to db. And then as well over here we can say db.categories. And if we missed anything, we'll probably be able to catch it when we run it. So that'll be okay. So let's go here, we'll say db. This is like when TypeScript would be very helpful. So db.categories, and let's go here, let's say db. And then over here we're going to say db.push or .products.push. And then lastly over here we're going to say db. And then over here we're going to say db.reviews. Okay, very simple, really simple, not that difficult at all. So let's just go ahead and save this and just make sure that everything works perfectly. Let's just run a few queries. Maybe we want to query for all the products. Let's go ahead and query for their image. Okay, that seems like it works. What if I queried for the category of each product? Let's see if I run that. Seems like this is working perfectly fine. Let's go back and let's run the query to get all of the categories, the name as well as the ID of them. So let's go ahead here and let's execute that, and there we go. Awesome. So now what do we want to do? Well, of course, what we want to do is we want to write a mutation to delete all of the, delete the category that we don't want. And of course, we already have a mutation set up in our schema for this, but we need our resolver. So now what we need is our wonderful resolver in order to handle this. Now, here's the thing. This is actually a lot more complicated than you think. So here's the thing. A category, okay, deleting this itself is pretty easy, but a category also has associated products. So what happens to those products once the category is deleted? So what happens to that? And similarly, products have reviews. So what happens to the reviews if for some reason the products gets deleted? So we have to first decide what we want to do. Do we want to, if we delete a category, what do we want to do with these products? What is it that we want to do? So there's a few options. If we delete a category, we can cascade the deletions. We can cascade the deletions to the products and then cascade the deletions to the reviews. That is one option. Another option, if we want to keep the products, even if the category is deleted, then what we want to probably do in that case is something like, hey, I'm going to delete this product, or I'm going to delete this category, and every category that has this product, I'm going to set its category ID to null. So I'm going to set it to null, and that's not cascading. And then what that allows us to do is actually keep our products, keep our reviews, and then maybe sometime in the future, I can actually link it back to a product or back to a category. And that's exactly what our client wants us to do. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So the first thing is, before we actually move on with any cascade, let's just go ahead and try to delete a category from this list. Okay? Very simple. And let's get rid of this products over here. So the first thing that we want to do is, let's go over here. And what we're going to say is delete category. Delete the category, the wonderful category. We got the parent, then we have the args, and then we're going to just extract out the DB from the context. So the first thing that we want to do is get the ID. So let's get to the ID of the category we want to delete. And now what we can simply say is db.categories is equal to db.categories.filter, and then for each category, I want to return the category where the category ID is not equal to the ID that we provided. That's really it. That's all we have to do. And of course, we have to return a Boolean value, so let's just return true. And that's really all we have to do. If we were to go here, and then we were to say, I want to delete sports. Let's go ahead and let's have that in there, sports. And then what we can say here is, well, we only want to return true. So if I were to execute this, we get true. And then over here, if we were to execute this, you can see that sports is gone. So it has deleted. However, again, the issue that lies now is that the products, they have the ID that is associated to that sports category. So what we need to do is filter through all of those. And then for each element that has that ID, we need to change its category ID to null. So let's go ahead and do that right now. And now to do this, we might have to do a little bit of changes in our schema. So let's go over here. So this is the type product. And you can see here that this is nullable, which is good because this might not be present. This might not be something that's present. So actually we might not have to make any changes here, which is terrific. And that's actually good. We actually might not have to make any changes at all. So this is really good. So the category itself is optional. We might not have a category for a product. And the way that we would perform this is, well, by having null. So let's go here, and what we're going to say is we're going to say db.products. We're going to say that that's equal to db.products.map. And what this is going to do is just going to return a new product array for us. And what we're going to say is, so if product dot category ID triple equals the ID that we have provided, then what we want to do is we want to return that product entity, except we want to change its category ID to null. So what we can simply do is have an object here, destructure out everything that is inside of that product object, and then we can have our category ID equal to null. Else, in the else case, then what happens in the else case is the product does not match the category ID, and in that case we want to just return that product. All right, that's very simple, all we want to do. So let's go ahead and save this again. And now remember, when we restart our server, our data is going to come back. So you can see here our data comes back because we're not persisting it inside of a database. So let's actually run our query right now to get products. So let's go here, let's run a query to get all of our products. And then let's just get the product ID as well as the product name. So you can see here we have many products, soccer ball, whatever. And what I want to do now is delete the category over here. So actually let's go here and then let's also execute the categories. I want the category name for each element. And now what I want to do is I want to delete this category, deleted. If I execute this, you can see deleted. Now if I execute this, what's going to happen to these elements? Well, if I execute that, there seems to be something wrong. So it says cannot return null for non-nullable query products. So it seems here that something is going awry, which is fine. This is exactly kind of what we expected. If I were to run this, well, it seems like something is nullable here as well. So let's see what happened. So what we can do actually to kind of debug this is let's go to our query over here. So this is the query that we're executing, the products query, and it's kind of complicated. And very simply, all I want to do is just console.log the filtered products. So console.log the filtered products. Let's go ahead and do that right now. So let's console.log this. Now, if I were to run this initially, you can see that everything seems to be okay. And if I were to open up my terminal, let's get rid of all these extra terminals, you can see that everything here is also fine. So everything is completely okay. But for some reason, what's happening, and let me just get rid of the category. So for some reason, when we execute delete category, and then we try to execute this again, we get, well, null values. So why is that? Let's see here. So category ID is equal to null, category ID is equal to null. That seems to be okay. So why is this occurring? Oh, over here, we're getting undefined. So we have some sort of problem in our algorithm. So for some reason, what we're doing is we're returning undefined, which is surprising. I'm not really sure why that's happening. Okay, so let's go back over here to our algorithm. And let's see what's going on here. So we have, okay, so we're doing db.products, db.map. If this is the case, okay, of course, we need to return the product. That's what it was. All right, so let's try to do this again. So if I were to query for the products, we get this. If I were to query for the categories, we get this. If I were to execute this, we actually end up deleting that specific category. Now let's see what happens over here. Okay, everything is working fine. These things are still here. But if I query for a specific category and I want their name, you can see here that the category is null for the products. So it's null for the products. Now the other ones, they still have categories. So that's good. That's exactly what we wanted. That way we can actually keep our category, but then we can have our products have a null value. And then later on, if we want to put them in a category, that's completely fine. We can preserve that product as well as preserve those product reviews. In this section, what we're going to do is write the logic to delete a specific product. This is going to be extremely similar to what we have done with the delete category. Really, really similar. Except there's going to be one difference. This time when we delete a product, we don't want to keep that product's reviews. There's really no point at that point because we just deleted that product. So what we want to do is we want to cascade the deletions to the reviews as well. That's really the only difference, and I'm sure you guys know how to do it. So I do highly encourage you to try it on your own. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I give you guys time. Hopefully you guys manage to do it in those 5 seconds. And now I'm going to go ahead and try it out myself. So to do this, let's go, of course, as always, we're going to go to our schema and we're going to change how our mutation is going to look. So we're going to have a new mutation called delete product. And very similarly, to uniquely identify the product that we want to delete, we're going to provide it with an ID, and we're going to have some sort of Boolean. Okay. And you might be wondering, okay, well, it seems like we're always returning true. And we are. That's the way that I designed this. However, if we go back to our mutation over here, what we could possibly do is check if that ID even exists in our database, and if it doesn't, we can return false. So that's something that we can do, but we won't do it for now because this is a very simple application that I want you guys to utilize to learn GraphQL. All right, awesome. So now that we have written our mutation, very simple, we did that inside of our schema. All we have to do now is similarly, I hope I was zoomed in here a little bit. Let's just zoom in some more. All we have to do is very similarly, and maybe even some more actually, why not? Is very similarly, let's just go here and let's just say I want to delete a product. So I want to delete a product. So let's go here. Hey, wonderful cat, how are you, buddy? Come on, relax, I'm making a video, okay? Come on, be quiet, please. All right, sorry, apologies about that. So we're gonna do parent. I think he learned his lesson and he's not gonna do this anymore. And we're gonna get the ID from the args. And then what we want to do is, of course, want to get our database from the context. Okay, cool. So over here, we have delete product. So let's go ahead and do very similar to what we have done here. So we're gonna do db.products. And then that's going to be equal to db.products.filter, and we're going to filter for each product that doesn't match that ID. So we're going to say where the product ID is not equal to the ID in our args. Really simple thing to do here. And now what we want to do is, of course, cascade that deletion inside of the reviews. So very similarly here, we can just do db.reviews is equal to db.reviews.filter. We can say here review. We're going to say where the review.product ID is not equal to the ID inside of our database. And that's very simple. At the very end, what we can also do is simply return true. That's it. Okay, that's really all we have to do. That's pretty much it. So let's go ahead right now and let's just query for all of the products. And also let's query for some of their reviews. So let's just query for some of their reviews. So let's go here and let's say the comment of the review. So let's delete this one over here. So let's delete the steel pot. And what this should also do is delete the review where the comment is, when I bought this, the stove broke, decent pot, blah, blah, blah. So it should delete these reviews as well. So let's go ahead and do this right now. So I'm going to go here, grab this ID. I'm going to go here and perform a mutation. I'm going to delete a product. Delete a product. I'm going to supply it with an ID. And then that's it. So that's what I'm going to do. So execute this. Seems like it gets true. And now if I were to execute this again, this steel pot should be gone. And it is. It's gone. It's completely gone. Now let's go and let's query for the reviews. So let's go query. And I want to, oh, it seems like we can't just query for reviews. That's completely fine. But I guess we're gonna have to just take my word for it that it has deleted the product's reviews as well. And maybe to even double check this, what we can do is when we query for products, when we query for products, where is it? Let's go here and let's query, let's get rid of this console.log. When we query for products, let's also console.log the db.reviews. We're going to go ahead and console.log this. Now let's open up our terminal. And what we're going to do here is first, let's go ahead and query for this. You can see here that these are our reviews. So we have, let's see here, I'm trying to quickly find a review where, what is this last review? This last review is the ball got as flat as the earth. I want it round. So I'm assuming this is, okay, this is a soccer ball review. So this review, this last review should not exist if I delete the soccer ball. So let's go ahead and let's do that. Okay, so let's go here and let's go here. And what I want to do is I want to delete this soccer ball. So let's go here and let's delete this product. Save that and let's execute. If we execute this again, what happens, as you can see here, if I were to execute this again, don't have the soccer ball anymore. And you can see here in the reviews, the last review isn't that soccer ball review. So this clearly worked. Awesome. So the last thing we need to do is just simply delete a review, and this is the easiest of them all. In order to be done our deleting journey, what we need to do is finally have the ability to delete a review. So as usual, let's go over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to say delete review. So we're going to say delete review in our schema. And this is going to be extremely similar. We're going to have an ID as well as, well, an ID inside of our parameter, and we're going to return a Boolean value. This is going to be the simplest out of the three because over here we're not doing any set nulls or any delete cascades. We're just going to simply delete that record. So to do that, of course, we're going to need to go to our mutation. And then in here, we're going to create a new mutation called delete. And we're going to call this delete review. And as per usual, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this because the parameters are going to be exactly the same. And very simply, we're just going to do a db.reviews is equal to db.reviews.filter. We're going to filter out for all of the reviews that we're going to filter for all of the reviews that their ID is not matching the ID that we have. And that's it. That's pretty much all we have to do. So let's just give this a quick test. So let's go over here and let's run this query. And let's say we have this product steel pot and we want to delete this review. Then what we're gonna have to do is grab this ID over here and let's perform the mutation delete review. Darn it, delete review. And we're gonna have to pass in this ID. So we're gonna have to pass in this ID. If we run this, we get some sort of error. So it says here, cannot return null for non-nullable. That's fine. That's completely fine. It's because I forgot to return true here, indicating that we had some sort of success. So let's delete this review. We return true. And then if I were to query for the product, we shouldn't have this review anymore. So this when I bought this stove, it broke. If I were to execute this again, you can see that that review is deleted. Pretty much it. How simple was that? The last thing that we need to do is deal with updates. So we need to update our data in some way. So of course this is a mutation because we are changing our data. We're mutating our data. Now let's actually go here, and as usual, what we're going to do is we're going to start with updating the category. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to define which record we want to update. Is it this one? Is it this one? Or is it this one? Well, to do that, of course, we have been supplying it with the ID. So the first thing that we're going to probably need to do is define the ID of the category that we want to update. So let's call this update category. And then we're going to say ID. And then we're going to say you have to supply us with an ID. The second thing is we want to supply it with the properties that we want to update. In terms of the category, really the only property that we can update is the name. But for example, if our category has more and more properties, something like the product, so if we have the name, the price, let's also add a description here. So how are we going to update a record if it has multiple properties? Well, what we could do is we can actually supply it with all of the properties, as well as your key value pairs, and any property that we want to change, we're just going to go ahead and change that specific property. For example, I'm going to go over here to the product example. Let's say I want to update this record over here, and I just want to update its price and description. Well, what I would do is I would supply it with this ID, and then I would give it an object where we have the name still as steel pot. So the name is going to stay exactly the same. However, the price is going to be different, the description is going to be different, and of course the other fields are going to stay the same. So I'm going to supply it with the image, with image 1, and I'm also going to supply it with, I believe the quantity is the next one. And the quantity is exactly the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get that object, and some of the properties are going to be exactly alike, while some of them are going to be different, and I'm just going to reset that object. Very simple. That's all we're going to do. So what we need to do is inside of the params, we need to ask for the structure of the object of the thing that we're trying to update. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So over here we have update. And what we want to do is, well, we want another parameter, and this parameter we can call as input as well. So we're going to call this as input. And what this is going to be is very similar to the add input category. So if we go to add input category, you can see here we have this, and that. So what I suggest doing is just copying and pasting this, and this might seem a little bit, oh actually wait, no, for this we're going to use the add category input, and copying and pasting this and just call it update. And the reason why we're doing it this way is maybe later on in the future we're going to want to have different things than the add as well. So let's go here, we're going to have that in there, and let us go over here. I'm going to say this. Awesome. And then at the end of the day, what I want to return is, let's just return the category that we have updated. Very simple. So let's go here, let's copy this, and let's go to our mutations, and let's go here, and as per usual, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. Awesome, this is really awesome. So I believe we're getting some syntax errors here. Why are we getting syntax errors? And that's probably because we don't need parentheses like that. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we have the ID. We also have the DB. So, okay. So now what we need to do is find the index of the element that shares this ID. So what we can do is we can do const index is equal to, and then we can say that this index is equal to the db.categories dot find index, and then we want to find the index of the category where the category.id triple equals the ID that we have supplied in our database, or in our arguments rather. So now what we can do is very simply, let's just go ahead and let's just simply console.log that index. We're just going to console.log that index right now. Very simply. So let's go here, let's go to our terminal. Let's close this one off. Seems like our application has crashed. I wonder why. I'm not really sure why this crashed. Our wonderful application is done. It's gone forever. So let's maybe it's the new thing that made it crash. Still crashing. Let's go to our schema. I suspect it might be something to do with our schema. So update category input. Okay, we have that there. Let's open up our terminal and just read the error. So it says here we have a GraphQL error. So expected a colon, but found category, whatever. This is on line, I'm not really sure. I'm assuming this is in the schema. So let's go here. And it's in the, over here. Okay, so yeah, you need a colon there, of course. So now if you were to start this, awesome, it works. Okay. So now what I want to do is, let's go ahead and let's create this mutation where we update the category. Oh my goodness, update the category. And we need to supply it with a category ID, of course. So let's run a query to get all of the categories. Let's get this one, the kitchen one. And this should be index of 0. So we're gonna update the category. We're gonna supply it with this ID. And then the input is going to be an object where the name is going to be maybe kitchen and bath. I don't know. Kitchen and bath. And then we're going to ask for the name. Okay, so this should fail because it's going to return a null value. But if we go to our console, if the index is correct, we should have gotten 0, and we haven't. So let's see why that is right now. That's because we commented everything out. So let's do this again. Run this, and we get 0. Okay, this is awesome. That's exactly what we want. Okay, and over here what we can do is we can get the input as well from the args. And then what we can say is db.categories, and remember this is an array, so we can say of this index is equal to the input, because the input has the exact same structure. It's the exact same structure. And actually, that's not quite true. The index over here, the element inside of the categories, it also has, let's go here to our database, it also has the ID. So what we need to do is actually destructure out the object inside of that record. So let's go over here into the mutations. And so what we can say here is, okay, we want everything that is inside of this particular record, but also we want to mutate it with the input as well. So we want to mutate it with the input as well. So that way, because the input doesn't have the ID, that's still completely fine. We're going to get it from here, but everything else is going to be mutated. Another thing that we could probably do, and I think the way that we're doing it right now is better, is doing something like ID is .id. But I think the way that we have done it this way is a lot better. So let's save this. And then what we want to ultimately do is simply just return the element that we have updated. All right, that's pretty much it. So let's actually give this a quick go. So let's run this. We get this, and now to double check that this works, now if we were to execute this again, you can see kitchen and bath. So that has updated. Now, of course, we need to do the exact same thing for the product as well as the reviews. All right, so let's just do the same thing for the update product as well as the update reviews in this one video. Very similar to what I've done before. Again, as per usual, try to do it on your own. If not, then I'm going to continue on. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to copy this, paste it a few times. I'm going to say here, update product. And then over here, what I'm going to do is update the review. And then over here, we're going to say update product input. And then over here, update review input. And over here, we're going to return a product. And of course, here, we're going to return a review. Really simple. So now what we want to do is, of course, create those schemas. Now again, we're just going to copy and paste this, and this seems kind of repetitive, but in the future, we might end up changing this a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Now, one thing that I want to note is now that we have the ability for a product not to exist with a category, maybe it's a good idea to actually remove this bank over here. So we can have nullable values if we want to. If we want to disassociate a category with a product with a category. Now similarly over here, what we're going to do is we're going to have that. And then in this case, we're not going to have the nullable because a review should always have a product. So we're going to keep that as is. All right, that's pretty much it. And if we were to save this, and open up our terminal, something has failed. Let's see why that is. I was highly suspecting that nothing will fail, but I'm not that smart. So update review input. Did you mean add review input? No, I meant update review input. Where is that at? Input review input. That's probably why. So update review input. And if we were to save this, now everything is fine. All right, very cool. And now in the mutation, very simply, I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste this twice over. And I'm going to say here update product. And then over here update the category. So we want to, update the review. So one thing we want to do is if this right over here, so if we provide it with an index that doesn't actually exist, then, or we provide it with an ID that doesn't actually exist, then what happens is this right here is going to return -1. So maybe we should actually catch that somewhere over here. So maybe we can say if index triple equals -1, then what we'll do is we'll return, and we'll return null. That's what we'll do. We'll return null. And because we return null, we have to say here inside of our schema that this is going to be a nullable return. So we're going to return null. And let's do the exact same thing over here with the product as well. And over here, we're going to have to change this to products. And over here, we change this to product. And over here, we're going to have to change this to product as well. And then over here, we're going to have to change this to products. Very boring stuff here. And then products. Okay, and that's pretty much it. Okay, that's pretty much it for the products. The logic is exactly the same. And then over here, we're just going to change this to reviews. We're also going to change this to review, and this to review, and then this over here to reviews, and then this to reviews, and then apologies everyone for being super boring, reviews. That's it. We're done. So now if we were to save this, now let's go ahead and let's try to test this out. Let's first test out the if we supply it with some sort of incorrect UUID that doesn't match any element that we actually want to update. So for now, if I were to change this to like 71, which is something that doesn't match anything, and we're to run this, we get null. Okay, that's awesome. That's exactly what we wanted. All right, so let's try this now. Let's go query for a bunch of products. I don't have a query for that, so let's go here. So I'm going to say products, and I want to get their ID as well as their name, as well as some other things. Let's also get the price and the on sale status and the quantity. Let's get all of these things. Awesome. So let's say what I want to do is for the steel pot, I want to update the name of it, maybe I want to update the price and I want to update the on sale status. So I want to lower the price a little bit and update the on sale status to true, because the pod is not doing very well and I just want to sell it and get it over with. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to execute a mutation where I am going to update the product. I'm going to update the product. And now what I want to say is, well, the ID, of course. The ID is this ID over here. Let's copy that. And then we have to supply it with the input. So the input is going to take in a lot of things. So we're going to take in the name. And then over here, what is the name? Let's actually just copy all this stuff. Let's copy all that. So let's do this, get rid of all these JSON stuff. All right, So we're still missing some things. So let's also query for the description, because we don't want to change the description. So let's copy this. And then the last thing that we need, and we can always hover over it to see what it's unhappy about. It seems like it's unhappy with the image. So the last thing that we need to supply it with, and also we need to supply it with the category ID, of course. So we're gonna say image and then category. Okay, so the category ID can actually remain the same. We don't have to supply that. So over here we can say image, and then what is the image of this? If we were to execute this, we get image 1. So we don't want to change the image. So that's what we want. And of course, we're gonna get our updated record. So let's just get whatever, the name of the updated record. Well, actually in this case, let's get the name, the price, as well as the on sale status. So I want to change the price to 32 and I want to change the on sale status to true. Let's execute this. Seems like it works. Now if I were to query for this again, notice here, the price and the on sale status should change, but everything else should remain the same. Awesome. That's it. It works. And we could also test this out for the reviews, but I think I'm kind of lazy and I'm just going to assume that it works because the logic is very similar. So we're not going to test it out, but we also have implemented it over here. You guys can try to test it out on your own, and if it doesn't work, then I'll probably just take down this video and do it again. Hopefully I don't have to do that.